Snow drifted in slow, deliberate spirals through the black of Winterfell's night, each flake a quiet herald of things beyond mortal ken. The wind, unchained and merciless, carried sounds that were not wholly the wind's own. Distant horns, the groaning of timber under siege engines, the ragged breath of men who waited to kill or be killed before dawn. Against the battlements, torches hissed in their brackets, the flames bent low by gusts that smelled of pine pitch and iron and fear. In the great hall, Sansa Stark paced, cloak drawn tight, her thoughts a relentless tally of dwindling stores and broken loyalties. Somewhere beneath the stone floors, the old crypts listened, and the bones of Starks gone cold remembered another age when Winterfell's walls had never been breached. Above them all, the sky was a vault of frozen ink. Scattered stars washed in unblinking judgment, but the moon hid behind its own cloak of cloud, refusing to bless the night with silver clarity. The godswood lay at the castle's heart, snow-blanketed, pristine, silent. There, beneath the reddening leaves of the weirwood, Ghost prowled, paws sinking without sound into white drift, his breath pluming like steam from a forge. His eyes, blood-bright, swept the gloom as though reading runes in the darkness. The heart tree's face looked on. Sap tears turned to ice beads on its bark, as if it mourned something not yet lost, but already grieved. Ghost's ears flicked. Beyond the walls, the siege shuddered in low tremors. A spoken promise that come morning, the river of violence would overflow its banks. He knew the timbre of men at war, the tang of panic sweat, the coarse bark of captains shaping lines, the metal rasp of blades drawn 100 at a time. In the hush between gusts, he caught something else. A high, distant howl, thin as a frozen wire, fraying in the wind. A call. Not his, but kin to his. Instinct flared through sinew and bone. The pack was out there. Not the half-remembered warmth of littermates long lost, nor the calm certainty of a master's hand, but a raw, untamed chorus of northern wolves, dire and otherwise, drawn by winter's hunger and the scent of blood. Ghost's muzzle lifted. He answered, yet the sound that left him was no simple wolf cry. It wandered through octaves, holding a grieving note that spoke of hearths broken, of children orphaned, of the uneasy place where beasts and men blurred into the same desperate shape. In the great hall, the candles guttered, worried by a draft that had no business slipping past shut doors. Sansa paused, head cocked. She thought she heard a lament in that lonely howl, a promise that the old gods still listened. Arya, seated at the high table sharpening needle, looked up only briefly, long enough for her gray eyes to meet her sister's, for her hand to still on the whetstone, and for a whisper of a smile to pass between them before she returned to her careful rhythm. Iron on iron sang another song, defiance, relentless and unending. Outside the walls, the foe's banners flogged the air. Ramsay Bolton's flayed men bled in effigy beside the black stag of House Baratheon. Though Stannis himself lay ash in some far-off wind, his remnants fought here under sellsword command. Scattered among them were lesser sigils. Broken sunbursts, badgers rampant, a mailed fist clutching a torch. No single lord led this siege. Winterfell's enemies were too many and too fractious for unity. But starvation and the promise of Northman coin had made allies of rivals. They ringed the castle in crude encampments, fields trampled to sludge, tents stitched from sailcloth, fire pits coughing sparks into the night. Men took turns at watch, huddled in cloaks, stiff with rime. They grumbled of the cold, of the shadows slipping at the tree line, of how the wolves were restless tonight, their howls threading everywhere like ghost pipes over a frozen barrow. Commanders barked for discipline. A wolf could not scale a wall, they scoffed. Yet some remembered Harrenhal tales, nights when monsters thicker than horses tracked the woods in silence and tore armored men from the saddle with a single bite. The younger ones listened wide-eyed, knuckles whitening on spear shafts when the wind moaned low. Ghost moved through Winterfell like a pale wraith. He padded past the broken tower where snow entered freely through rents left by fire and time, past the kennels where hounds whimpered in uneasy sleep, past the mews where ravens shifted with restless wings. The castle felt smaller beneath his tread, as though stone walls and towers could shrink in the face of something vast and imminent. At a postern gate near the guards' barracks, he paused. 2 sentries were stationed there, men of the Stark garrison, wrapped in black cloaks, cheeks raw from cold. They startled when the direwolf's gaze settled on them. One man made the old sign, hand to heart, then brow, invoking protection. The other dared a trembling jest that if Snow's beast had come to relieve them, he was welcome to the post. Ghost stared a moment longer, then turned his head toward the night beyond. An unspoken order. It was arrogance to think a beast might command men, yet in Ghost's posture there was something of the kings who had ruled before dragons came to Westeros. The sentries exchanged a glance, uncertain if they should open the gate. Dogs in the kennels whined. Somewhere above, a rook cried out, startled from slumber. Metal groaned on hinge. The smaller of the 2 men lifted the bar. Snow drifted inward as the door cracked, a wheeze of frigid air biting at their throats. Ghost did not look back. He stepped into the dark, and the gate closed behind him with a decisive thud. The bar slotted once more. On the far side of the moat, the forest gathered like silent watchers, branches heavy with ice, trunks black as night's own marrow. Ghost trotted forward, white fur blending with snow until only those eyes remained, twin embers trailing away. Beneath the trees the snow was less deep, the canopy catching most of winter's downpour. But what lingered there had been hardened by days of hoof and boot, by the ceaseless patrols of men too afraid to stray too far, yet too desperate to stay idle. Ghost sniffed the air, tracking scents that overlapped and crossed. Deer musk, scat of hair, blood, old and new, where soldiers had dressed kills and left offal to steam on the snow. He found fox tracks and pine marten trails, but these he ignored. He was looking for larger sign. He found it a quarter-mile beyond the ridge that overlooked the encampments. A lion's paw prints, wide and heavy, the claws barely registering because the pads pressed so deep. A direwolf, no doubt. The track was hours old, but not more. Ghost lowered his muzzle, inhaled, tasting identity in the scent, the particular tang of river mud and marsh reed, foreign to these uplands. Nymeria had ranged far since leaving Arya's side, leading a burgeoning pack that haunted the Red Forks floodplains. Yet here, tonight, the marshland scent was faint, old. The print belonged to one who had traveled with Nymeria, perhaps a splinter of her growing legion now cast north by instinct or rumor of war. Echoes answered the thought. To the south, another howl, deeper, resonant, so vast it seemed wrenched from the earth's own roots. Then a second, higher and ragged, more fox than wolf, afraid yet unwilling to be silent. They overlapped, wove together, then faded as though the night had swallowed them whole. Ghost's hackles lifted, not in fear, but in recognition. He issued a short bark, curt and commanding. Silence fell again, but it was the silence of poised breath, of watchers waiting for a cue. He began to run. Snow hissed beneath his stride. Trees blurred past like columns in a hall. His heart pounded, the rhythm echoing a memory. Nights alongside Jon on the wall, when the world was nothing but wind and ice, and the certainty of each other's footfalls. Jon was distant now, fighting another war beneath foreign banners, and the bond between man and beast was a taut wire glittering across miles. Yet Ghost felt it thrum, a pulse of need, desperation, love stronger than chains. Protect them, it said. Protect what he cannot reach. The first wolf met him beneath a tangle of dead birch. She was lean, gray-brown, snout scarred from man-made traps. Her ears canted back at Ghost's approach, but she did not bear fangs. Instead she sank onto her haunches, head bowed. Behind her, 3 younger wolves hovered, yearlings by size, too gangly for true might yet driven by the reckless courage of youth. Ghost circled, sniffing each one. They bore the same marsh scent, though faint, and the musk of a long, harrowing trek. Hunger shone in their ribs, nevertheless their eyes were bright. He greeted them with a soft whine, then set off without pause. The small pack flowed after him like shadows cast by a single flame. Before they had gone another half-mile, 2 more wolves joined, black as pitch and larger than the gray female, likely siblings. They merged seamlessly, needing no introduction beyond the language of glances and pace. When Ghost raised his head to taste the wind again, the air held more voices, a rising murmur as if the woods themselves were waking from centuries of timid slumber. A ridge opened onto a shallow valley, where moonlight finally spilled between fractured clouds. There, Ghost paused. Wolves trotted in from every direction, called by some deem less wisdom. A pale brindled male limping on an old wound, a mother heavy with milk, who still moved with lethal grace. 2 scar-faced elders whose muzzles had gone white at the tips. They fanned in a loose half-circle, until nearly 30 shapes mottled the snow, eyes glinting amber, gold, and green. None challenged Ghost's place at their center. In his silence, in the measured rise and fall of his chest, they recognized the Alpha. He walked among them, touching muzzle to muzzle, flank to flank. The tension of stranger meeting, stranger dissolved into the deeper tension of purpose. Above their gathering, the sky shifted. The cloud veil parted just enough for moonlight to find them, turning each furred back silver. A soft whimper, hardly more than breath, rose from the youngest of the pack. Ghost answered with a growl that was not rebuke, but permission. The valley filled with their voices, a chorus of anticipation and mourning, of wrath and yearning. No man heard that symphony and remained unchanged, but the camp of Winterfell's besiegers was loud with its own discord. Drunken laughter, the stuttering beat of smiths hammering rivets, guards spitting curses at the cold. Where wolves sang, men drowned their fear in clamor, so they would not notice what the dark dragged toward them. Near the siege towers, a hedge knight named Sir Beric Ludholt paced his watch. He was no coward, had fought in the Blackwater and survived the burning of Stony Sept, but the north unsettled him. Each gust sounded like whispering. Every owl screech seemed a woman's wail. He stalked past bundled spearmen, nodded to a pair of sellswords stoking braziers, and paused at the canvas of his captain's tent. Beyond it, logs smoldered in a pit. Sparks twitched upward, dying mid-air. He gazed at those sparks like prayers that could not climb to heaven. A hush fell then, abrupt, uncanny. The camp dogs pricked ears, spines stiffening. Ludholt turned, hand dropping to his sword pommel, thinking some new prank of wind was at play. But the wind had stopped. Even the canvas hung slack. Into that hollow silence came a single note. Low, thrumming. Too round to be human, too steady to be chance. One dog answered, a guttural snarl. Another yelped. Over the rampart of snow-packed earth, a black wolf silhouette appeared against the smudge of trees. Then another beside it, and another. The ridge seemed to bloom with shapes, each larger than memory would allow, until the tree line writhed with eyes. Ludholt's breath caught in his throat. He had heard stories. Everyone had. The Direwolves of the kings of winter, vanished for centuries, born again with the Stark children. He had laughed at them over dice cups. Now those tales trotted down the slope in noiseless strides. Panic leapt campfires faster than flame itself. Men fumbled for helms, spilled arrows in the slush, shrieked orders half forgotten. Ghost watched from the ridge's midpoint, ears forward, muzzle tasting the metallic tang of their fear. He felt rather than thought the places they must strike. The horse lines where steeds would bolt into chaos. The supply wagons stacked with powder kegs of pitch. The commander's pavilion marked by gilded pennants. Strategy poured into him like cold water meeting hot iron. Hiss, steam, urge. He bolted. The pack followed, a tidal surge silent, save for the percussion of paws on crusted snow. They split upon the first tents like water around stones, some circling flank, others cutting through welter of stacked crates. A screaming horse reared, snapped its tether, and collided with the picket lines, scattering the lancers. Sparks erupted as braziers overturned, hot coals igniting straw, turning canvas to tinder. Ghost leapt a stack of barrels, landed atop a startled sellsword, and ripped through leather coat, bone, and throat before the man formed a word. Hot blood misted the air, immediately glazed by cold into ruby flecks on white fur. Ghost did not slow. He darted deeper, tail streaming like a crimson banner. At the wagon park, two wolves crashed into oxen traces, jaws clamping on nostrils, dragging beasts sideways so wagons toppled. Barrels of lamp oil cracked open. Staves burst. Dark liquid sluiced underfoot. A thrown torch spun end over end, landed in the pooling oil with a hiss. Flames roared into sudden life, taller than the siege tower's wheels. Men sprang back, screaming orders drowned by the howl of combustion. Yet for all the frenzy, the assault was not wholesale slaughter. Ghost steered the pack as if by invisible reins, driving prey outward rather than pinning them against walls. Their purpose was disruption, fracture, making an army into a rabble before dawn's light might rally them. Meanwhile, inside Winterfell, the walls blazed with new fires, signal blazes at first, then beacon pyres as watchmen gaped at the turmoil beyond. Trumpets blared, horns answered. Sansa ran to the parapet, Arya 2 steps behind, blade bare. They stared at the nightmare carnival, tents collapsing, horses bolting, flames clawing the sky, wolves moving like ivory ghosts through smoke. On the battlements the old maester, Edric, murmured that the gods had sent the children of the forest to war once more. No one corrected him. The spectacle defied reason, and reason bowed to awe. Ghost felt walls at his back, and knew the shape of stone even without looking. Once, long ago, he and his littermates had roamed these courtyards as pups. He could have turned then, raced through the burning maze to the open gates, reclaimed the hearth he had lost. But the fight was not done, and Winterfell would not be safe so long as any blade remained pointed its way. He surged toward the southern flank where siege towers loomed, their timber frames armored in soaked hides to resist fire. There, crossbowmen shuffled into formations, shields locking into a wall. Ghost snarled, teeth flashing. 2 wolves, flanked left, 3 right, more sweeping wide, in a crescent. The soldiers loosed quarrels in ragged volleys. Shafts clattered off shield rims as wolf bodies wove between them. The few that hit found shoulders of less vital heft. The beasts barely faltered. A sergeant bellowed for spears at close order, stepping forward to plant iron in the earth. Ghost met him head-on. The man thrust downward, convinced mass, and reach would halt any beast. Ghost twisted mid-air, jaws locking on hickory shaft just behind the spearhead, and wrenched. The blade wavered, skidded over his shoulder, fur leaving only a shallow line, then snapped. Before the sergeant found another weapon, fangs closed on his calf. He went down hard, and a yearling finished the work, throat torn in 2 precise bites. The other soldiers wavered, then broke. Terror proved contagious. Through it all, Ghosts kept count without counting. Pack members surging, retreating, regrouping. Casualties they inflicted, wounds they risked. He guided like a conductor whose baton was blood and flame, and his orchestra played slaughter. Yet somewhere beneath the savage cadence pulsed a deeper drum. Protect the pack. Protect the pack. Wolves died seldom tonight, but one black male fell to a lucky sword swing. Another limped with crossbow bolt buried deep. Ghost nudged the wounded toward the shadows where they might nurse hurt safe from further harm. The lost one he mourned only with a flick of ear and a low rumble. A promise not of grief but vengeance. In the keep, Brienne of Tarth strapped on her gorget, ignoring the wince of healing bruises. She turned to Podrick Payne, who hovered with helm and arms. "If the gods send miracles," she said, "it is no excuse not to meet them halfway." She ordered the gates opened enough for sorties. Men and women rushed to her banner, some armored in mismatched leathers, others in the Direwolf livery, whatever Winterfell could muster. Sansa objected for a heartbeat, fearing a trap. But Arya's sharp nod and Brienne's calm assurance won the moment. The portcullis rattled upward, its chains singing like heavy-tongued bells. Outside, the chaos had matured. Where once disciplined lines ringed Winterfell, now knots of men scuttled like ants at a bonfire's edge. Wolves herded them northward, away from arrow range and toward the blasted field where the Bolton lines had first been drawn months ago. There, in the gloom, horns sounded. Bolton horns, calling for order. Yet orders require the obedient, and obedience wilted in the face of teeth. Brienne led the Stark contingent across the bridge of frozen moat, her sword Oathkeeper bright as a shard of dawn. She did not charge blindly. Rather she marched straight for the supply yard, clearing a corridor through fleeing men. Wolves parted for her, recognizing perhaps the same grace that Ghost bore. The beasts circled at flanks, pushing stragglers into her path. She struck with broad strokes, pommel to temple, flat to jaw, killing only when she must. Behind her, Podrick's blade rang a timorous echo, and Glover men wielded long axes, hacking tent ropes so canvas collapsed on siege engineers still scrabbling for torches. Sparks burst again. Somewhere a powder keg exploded, a dull roar that sent orange bloom rolling skyward. Timber rails of a siege tower splintered, the whole edifice listing sideways in a groan of joints. Wolves scattered as it crashed, then regrouped and ran on, tails high, throats alive with the hunt. Ghost vaulted a trench, dropped inside the ruined commander's pavilion, and found maps strewn across a folding table. His muzzle tore parchment without care, yet he smelled the ink, the wax seals, proof that strategy lived here until moments ago. Footsteps retreated behind canvas walls. He followed, slipping between posts like smoke, and emerged to find a captain fleeing on horseback, trying to outrun what no horse could outrun. Ghost lunged. His jaws locked on the steed's hock, flesh parted. The horse screamed whip-sharp. The rider tumbled, hit the ground, rolled, came up with dagger drawn. He saw the wolf's eyes and understood something vast and terrible in an instant. The dagger fell. The man rose shaky palms, a plea trembling his lips. Ghost stood over him but did not kill. Instead he fixed the man with a stare older than houses or crowns, older than man's dominion in these lands. He growled low. It was not surrender he demanded but remembrance. When the man finally ran, stumbling north with hands clutching shredded cloak, Ghost let him go. Someone would carry the story. A horn sounded from Winterfell's gatehouse, long and rising, the signal to recall. 4 blasts. Return. Wolves heard it as keenly as soldiers. Ghost tilted his head. Blood glazed his muzzle, steam curling from nostrils. Around him the pack slowed, some finishing meals of fresh kill, others limping together at his side. He chuffed, throaty and soft. One by one they abandoned pursuit, loping toward the ridge again. Firelight silhouetted them, stark lines of muscle, fur bristling like banners in a wind of their own making. They crossed the killing field at trot, weaving among corpses and scattered weapons. No arrows chased them now. Men cowered behind overturned wagons, prayed behind shields, or fled in mad dashes for the tree line. The fighting had not ended, but its backbone was snapped, its will melted like candle wax too near the flame. At the moat Ghost halted, peering up the raised drawbridge where Winterfell's portcullis waited, half lowered for defense. Brienne stood under its arch, helm off, face streaked with soot. She met Ghost's gaze with calm respect, then glanced at the wolves behind him. The signaler on the parapet called down. "We can't open wider." The chains were frozen, snapped under strain. Brienne nodded to Ghost as though they spoke a common tongue. She stepped aside. He leapt, claws raking the slick stones, landed within. 2, 3 more wolves followed, skipping across the chasm with impossible lightness. Others, lacking the Direwolves' reach, lingered at the bank. They were pack yet not pack. Winterfell walls were never built for them. Ghost looked back, ears flattening in momentary conflict. But a low whine from an elder female decided it. The outside wolves would fade into woods, guard the perimeter, and join again when needed. Inside the courtyard, soldiers stared in silence. Children peered from doorways, wide-eyed, as the white beast padded across flagstones glimmering with meltwater-streaked blood pink. Ghost shook snow from his coat, sending red spatters arching. He walked past stalls where stable boys hid behind barrels, along the shadow of the great keep, and into the open doors of the great hall. There, firelight danced across oaken beams, the smell of stew and sweat and smoke curled thick. Sansa stood near the high table, knuckles white on its edge. Arya stood beside her, face schooled to calm, though her eyes burned. Ghost approached slow, each step a question lodged in centuries of stories about beasts and men. At 3 paces he stopped. The room hushed until even the hearth fire seemed to hush. Sansa's breath trembled in her throat. She reached a tentative hand. Ghost bowed his head. Not in submission, but in greeting. Blood dripped from his whiskers, red beads stippling the rushes. Sansa pressed fingers to his forearm, warm, coarse reel, then knelt despite the protest of stiff skirts and colder stone. Ghost's body trembled, not from fatigue, but from something deeper. The aftershock of purpose met. Purpose, yet unfinished. He felt her hand slide along his ruff, gentle amidst the violence. At the far end of the hall, old Maester Edric whispered a prayer. Arya sheathed needle and crouched too, smiling in the wry way of one reunited with a ghost she never thought to see again. Beyond the walls, night reeled under rising flames and falling snow. Wolves melted back into forest gloom, their eyes the last embers before shutters of trees closed. The siege was not over. Dawn would find the enemy licking wounds, counting dead, arguing blame. They would remember wolves and fear the next attack would come neither by ladder nor ram, but on silent paws under cover of moon. Inside Winterfell, Ghost stood sentinel at Sansa's side. He watched firelight waver in shadow pool. He listened to men shouting orders to bank garrison fires, and to runners clattering on stone with news of saved stores and captured weapons. He heard the steady click of Brienne's armor joints as she returned, reporting in low voice. He heard Arya laugh. Soft, almost astonished, when she told her sister she had always known Ghost would return. But Ghost also heard what none of them could. Far off, deeper than sound, the hum of still gathering packs answering calls in their own territories, carried through root and soil, through heart-tree whispers, and the drone of winter's veins. The siege might last weeks, months, a year. The north could be bled white. Yet, the old gods had claimed tonight, in fang and flame, and their will thrummed in the marrow of every wolf, prowling frost-bitten dark. Ghost lowered onto his haunches, head high, eyes half closed. Snowflakes drifted through the smoke that leaked from rafters where arrow holes let night in. They settled on his coat and traces of blood, turning each red bead into a bright ruby haloed in white. He would not sleep. Wolves did not dream when the night still thirsted. He would wait and watch, and be ready when frost again cracked like thunder, and men once more forgot they were only guests in the kingdom of beasts. The hours stretched. Fires guttered low, were fed, guttered again. Men whispered of morning. Some dozed, armor still buckled, swords across laps. Others prayed to unfamiliar gods, pressing tokens of the seven or carving runes learned only from wildling captives. Yet each man who walked the corridors this night passed the great hall at least once, if only to glimpse the white guardian by the hearth. A silent pledge that Winterfell's heart still beat. Far away in the forest a single, high howl rose, like glass shattering inside a cavern of night. Ghost answered with a rumble so deep it shook soot from rafters. Those sleeping on cots stirred but did not wake. They dreamed of vast snowscapes where pale eyes watched from tree lines and something ancient kept vigil in their stead. Ghost's call faded, yet the echo lingered in every corridor, every cell, and somewhere on a road cloaked in swirling white. Jon Snow felt his chest tighten as though a hand had reached through bone to squeeze his heart. He pulled his horse to a halt, drew breath frosting before him, and whispered a name. The wind stole away. He did not know why, but he believed Winterfell still stood. He believed someone, something, held the walls he loved. In that belief, Jon laid heel to stirrup and urged his mount on. The road ahead long and treacherous, but no longer hopeless. Night thinned toward morning. The worst of the flames dwindled to embers, but smoke curled skyward still, a calm warning to every soul within miles that Winterfell was not taken and would not yield. Inside the gates, life returned by increments. The murmur of cups filled, of wounds stitched, of children summoned from cellars. And through it all, Ghost waited, calm and unflinching, as the first pale stripe of dawn painted the eastern sky. Light touched the courtyard. Frost glittered atop blood pools now crusted brown. Crows swept down to claim the dead, bold despite the wolves ranged beyond the tree line. The siege had not broken, but its foundation was cracked. Among the tents of the enemy, mutiny brewed in whispers. Men demanded higher pay, safer posts, or passage south. Commanders counted arrows and found too few. Horses bolted in the night would not be found until thaw, if ever. Ghost watched the sun bleed through clouds. He breathed the scent of dying fires and knew fear. He did not wag tail or show tongue. Triumph was for men and their songs. Wolves solved hunger, then looked for the next. He knew the fight would return with sunset, or the next, or the next. He would answer with fang and fury, and the pack behind him. For now, though, Winterfell breathed a little easier, its stones warmed by more than blaze of burning tents. In the godswood the heart tree shimmered under morning dew that froze into crystals upon its red leaves, each a tiny lens catching dawn. And beneath that sacred bough, footprints of a direwolf crisscrossed the snow, marking a path that led outward and back, as though the old gods themselves had paced the earth, guarding children, guarding home. So closed the first night of many, a night of wolves. And the tale of how Ghost led a pack to break the siege spread on lips still numb with cold, carrying south with deserters' tales, east with ravens' wings, and west with traders whose wagons skirted the embers of battlefields. But stories, like winters, grow with retelling. What mattered to Ghost was not the shape words would take, but the shape of the land beneath his paws. And that land, for now, belonged once more to the howl and the hunt. He rose, silent as snowfall, and padded into the dim corridor beyond the hall, leaving faint crimson prints that soon faded in torch glow. Outside the gates, his brethren awaited beneath the wary eyes of sentries who no longer doubted the legends. Ghost would rejoin them at dusk. Already he sensed fresh snow on the wind, a veil to cloak their next foray. Already he mapped the veins of the siege like a hunter reading spoor. The morning bell tolled. Steel rang as men formed lines for roll call. Somewhere a baby began to cry and was comforted. Somewhere a raven cut across the pale sky, black wings loud in quiet air. Ghost slipped through a broken gap in the wall near the ancient kitchens, climbed rubble swift as thought, and emerged into the waking world beyond ramparts. He paused under the arch of sky, nose lifted, feeling the horizons shiver. The day would be brief. The night, endless. He would be ready. With a final glance at the towers of Winterfell, towers that glowed amber in the newborn sun, Host bounded downslope toward the waiting forest, where eyes gleamed and ears pricked beneath snow-laden boughs. The pack fell in behind him, invisible but for the shift of shadows when they moved. The hunt was not over. It had only drawn its first breath. Key. Snow's pale mantle thickened through the morning, settling over the ruins of tents and wagons, until the carnage became a strange white garden where only flagpoles and broken weapons sprouted. Smoke limped upward from charred canvas and fell into the steady hush of fresh flurries. Within Winterfell's walls, life stirred in careful beats, like a heart that had survived a night of trauma, and now tested each pulse for hidden pain. Ghost padded through the partial gap in the kitchens again just before noon, the pack at his heels. They had circled the outer camps until their paws were linen-wrapped in rime, herding any bold scouts back to their masters with growls and feints, but no more killing. Enough blood had been spilled for one sunrise. Now there was work that belonged to silence and watchfulness. They moved inside the walls in thin file, slinking along the lee of battlements where their whiteness merged with wind-blown drifts. Stark guards on the parapets marked their passing with wary nods, but no one dared bar their way. Some even tossed down strips of salt pork, which wolves accepted with a dignity that made the gift seem tribute rather than charity. In the courtyard, a frozen cistern had been cracked open for drinking. Ghost approached and drank deep, pink clouds blooming in the water from the drying gore on his muzzle. A stable hand edged forward with a bucket of clearer melt. Ghost let him pour it beside the basin and drank from that as well, tail still, and ears forward. The boy's breath quavered in the chill. He whispered thanks to the direwolf as though to a mighty knight. Brienne of Tarth emerged from the armory with Podrick, and a cluster of smiths hefting bundles of spare spearheads. Ghost watched their path without turning his head, noting the clink of iron and the tension in every shoulder. Sansa had doubled the forge's workload already. Green wood from the god's wood fed the bellows after they ran low on seasoned oak. The forest might not forgive, but Winterfell would not fall for want of heat and steel. Inside the great hall, the air tasted of boiled oats, broth thickened with dried peas, and smoke from damp logs. Sansa had set up a long table near the west hearth for wounded. The castle's few healers bound cuts, washed punctures, and heated wine laced with willow bark. Arya helped them, hands deft and decisive, pressing cloth into wounds while her eyes strayed often to the doorway in case Ghost returned. When he finally did, she smiled without surprise. She wiped palms on a rag and crossed to him. He lowered his head so she could check the slice on his shoulder. A shallow wound sealed by cold as much as clotting. She hummed her approval, whispered that the spear shaft would make a fine walking stick for the man who lost it, then scratched lightly behind Ghost's ears. Wordless gratitude flowed between them until a horn from the battlements shattered the quiet. 4 blasts again, this time not a recall, but a warning of riders. Brienne strode into the yard before the note ended, calling for bows and the crank for the scorpion on the east tower. Sansa hurried to the wall walk, her cloak flaring crimson over the new snow that had dusted every stair. Ghost followed, paws silent on stone. From the gatehouse parapet, they saw 5 figures pushing through the drifts on exhausted horses. The mounts staggered, heads dropping low, flanks scored by ice crust. At their center waved a scrap of white cloth tied to a spear. No heraldic device marked it. The color alone carried meaning. Brienne signaled to hold arrows. Sansa narrowed her gaze through swirling flakes until she recognized the leading rider. Sir Roderick Stark, once the Castellan's grandson, long exiled in White Harbor for refusing Bolton rule, now leaned in his saddle, mail shirt rent under a blood-soaked scarf. He had a single companion in stark gray, and 3 other riders in mismatched armor, free folk by the look of their furs, but flying the same meager flag of truce. The portcullis clanked half open to admit them. Ghost descended in Sansa's wake, and stood beside her as Sir Roderick dismounted, swaying. He pressed fist to heart in salute before his knees buckled. Arya and 2 guards caught him. Under the crusted scarf lay a gash from collar to ribs, clean, precise blade work rather than shrapnel. Roderick gasped that he had ridden 2 days from last hearth, harried by Bolton outriders, the entire stretch. Behind him the free folk knelt without being asked, palms flat on the frozen mud. They smelled of pine tar and seal oil. Their leader, a narrow-shouldered woman with white braids looped round her brow, bowed her head when Sansa thanked them for their escort. She answered in a rasping northern tongue that Brienne could not parse. But the gist needed no translation. Last hearth had fallen. Roderick forced the tale through clenched teeth while Maesters pulled off his gauntlets. The Boltons, denied victory here, had turned on the Umbers, breaking the old keep's walls with siege engines purchased from Selsale smiths on the White Knife. The assault had lasted a single dawn. Survivors scattered, some fleeing west to Bear Island, some south toward Winterfell. Most were hunted through the snow by flayed men on horseback. Roderick's party had eluded them only by wading waist-deep along an icy brook, letting the current steal their scent. But the horses had drunk the same water, and now moved like shadows of themselves. Sansa's voice did not waver as she issued orders. Empty 2 grain bins to feed the mounts, quarter the free folk in unused cellars near the smithy, post healers by the outer gate in case other refugees followed. Still, her fingers twitched at her sides. Each loss of a northern holdfast weighed on her, as though stone had been lifted from there and set upon her breast. As the newcomers were led away, Ghost circled the courtyard once, reading the angles of every guard stance, gauging whether fresh fear rippled under their helmets. Many would hide that fear until dusk fell again. Then it would leak from them in sighs and murmured prayers. He could taste it already, acrid as old smoke. He left them to their tasks and slipped through the kitchens into the godswood. There the hush was absolute. Snow muffling sound, the rush of blood in his ears seemed sacrilege. He trotted to the heart tree and placed one paw on its root. The cold bit deeper here. A sacred chill that seemed to hum inside the grain of the white bark. The tree's red eyes bled resin the color of garnets. Ghost shut his own eyes, tilted his muzzle to the sky, and inhaled long. From somewhere distant, a place not measured by miles alone, he sensed Jon again. That thin wire of shared essence stretched tauter, vibrating with urgency. Jon rode northward still, but not swiftly enough. Wolves could not tell men how roads closed under snow or how flayed banners lurked at river fords. They could only guide by paw and howl. Ghost lifted his head to the raw gray sky, loosed a call so deep it quivered the icicles on surrounding branches. The sound ran along Winter's spine, rushed out over fields and foothills, bounced from the shoulders of the mountains, and kept going south, faint but sure, a compass needle of sound pointing home. Afternoon waned beneath an iron sky. In the enemy encampment, captains convened around a brazier ringed by torn tent cloth. They argued it in thick cloaks, upon which snow melted to dark stains. The hirelings from Tyrosh demanded hazard pay. The Baratheon loyalists muttered about being tricked into fighting flayed man battles when they had signed on to retake Storm's End. Splinters of smaller hosts began staking torches in a circle about their own wagons, breaking the once tight ring around Winterfell into a string of crescent moons. But one cluster worked with grim purpose. Men in dark leather died to hide blood, overseen by a lank lieutenant with half an ear and a cruel cleft lip. These were Ramsay Bolton's personal scouts, chosen not for courage, but for the relish they took in cruelty. Through daylight hours, they hunted the tree line for any wolf bold enough to linger. By dusk, they had found 3, all juveniles who strayed too far. They skewered the first with a barbed lance, and left it twitching on a spit beside the cook fires. The second they trussed and clubbed, breaking legs but keeping lungs intact. Its yowls rang over the camp until even sellsword spat in disgust. The third escaped, but carried a deep slash across its haunch. The lieutenant tracked the blood trail until it vanished into a cleft of rock as night rolled down. He promised to return. Word of the atrocities drifted up to Winterfell via 2 deserters who crawled to the moat under cover of twilight, shouting for mercy. They had been condemned for gutting a comrade who tried to stop the wolf torture. Sansa let them in under heavy guard, fed them lentils, and demanded every scrap of intelligence. Both named Ramsay's lieutenant. Harbin Slade, once a kennel master in the Dreadfort, renowned for training dogs to hunt men. Now he hunted the dog's larger cousins. Arya listened from a shadowed arch. When the questioning ended, she traced the deserters' route on a chalk map pinned to the wall. She saw where the torture occurred, an open quadrant near the southern siege tower. Her throat tightened, but her voice was steady as she asked Brienne for 50 bowmen to harry that region at moonrise. Ghost sat in the passage beyond, listening. He too had heard the dying wolf's wail, carried faint on the breeze hours earlier. A note pitched in agony that had sliced straight through him. His pack had heard it as well. They had pressed close, fur to fur, until the sound guttered out. Now rage simmered in them, hotter than any fire. One wrong move tonight could turn their careful warfare into frenzy. Sansa forbade Arya's sortie. Too few archers, too much darkness, too easy for the enemy to bait them into ruin. Arya swallowed her anger, but her eyes burned fierce. She touched Needle's pommel once as she passed Ghost, and he matched her intensity with a growl so low. Only, she heard, there would be reckoning. Inside the library tower, still mostly intact after Ramsay's prior sacking, Maester Edric unfurled scrolls of northern legends. He read aloud to Sansa and Bran's empty chair of tales in which wolves and weirwoods formed one will, where the dead rose in times of direst need, called forth by the children of the forest. His words wove through the lamplit dust. Half comfort, half weapon. If folk believed the old gods fought beside the Starks, morale might hold through more nights like the last. Sansa nodded, but her thoughts churned practical. Bread measures, pitch stores, arrow counts. Columns of numbers adding to victory or extinction. Night swelled once more. a darker black than the preceding evening, heavy with unlit cloud promising fresh snow. Torches along Winterfell's walls glowed like scattered embers on ash, and their light bled quickly into the murk beyond. Inside the keep, hammers clanged on spearheads, casks of resin were hauled to the parapets, and cooks ladled hot barley soup, thick with marrow, into clay crocks for every soul who could hold a bowl. Brienne walked the ramparts, counting faces. She found men from House Riswell, whose grandsires had fought Robb Stark, and men from Bear Island, whose mothers still cursed Stannis' folly. She spoke to each, her voice calm and resolute, promising that dawn would show the enemy undone again if every pair of eyes stayed sharp. Her sincerity bound them like chain links. Ghost paced behind her, silent reassurance of older oaths. Below, in the bleak yard between first and second walls, Arya drilled half a dozen volunteers in moving silently over snow. She had them wrap boots in rags, soaked with tallow, taught them to breathe through wool to muffle exhalations, and made them follow her along an eel-slippery beam in moonshadow. Those who managed her tasks she accepted. Those who stumbled were sent to arrow boxes. When the sextet succeeded twice, she led them into the smith's shed and produced short, curved blades newly ground from scythe ends. She called them the quiet knives. At Ghost's far end of the yard, Bran's wheelchair sat empty beneath an awning. He was elsewhere, swimming rivers no one else could see. Ghost felt Bran when the warg slipped into his vision, a cool ripple like fresh water on scorched fur. The boy's presence lingered but did not attempt to steer. Bran merely watched, his consciousness a steady lantern. Through Ghost's eyes Bran read the courtyard, the ramparts, the snow-fogged field outside. Then he drew away, leaving a scent of weirwood sap and moonlit water on old stone. The pack waited in the godswood. 30 wolves again, despite the 2 lost. The limping yearling with the crossbow bolt had returned, the shaft gnawed out by his companions. A scar now puckered above his shoulder, angry and purple. None questioned his place. Beside him stood a vast black she-wolf, Nymeria herself, come north at last. She had arrived in the quiet hour after sunset, slipping past Bolton sentries with a legion of smaller gray wolves, who fanned along the tree line. Yet when she came into Winterfell's godswood, only the largest followed. 6 of ghost gray hide, 2 piebald, and 1 red. Ghost acknowledged her with a brush of his muzzle beneath her ear. She answered with a low breath that might have been welcome or reprimand. Their shared memory spanned cubplay beneath broken tower stairs, a human girl's warm laughter, riverside escapes under looming moon. Ghost told her nothing in words. His gaze pressed images into the dark. Harrowed refugees, tortured siblings, the shape of the siege ring whittled but not yet broken. Nymeria's gaze narrowed. Her pack's growls rose like distant thunder, until she flicked her tail once. Silence returned, taut as bowstring. Ghost led them out the postern again, single file, each wolf stepping where he stepped, the snow muffling their departure. They curved wide through a thicket where fallen branches lay under ghost-blue drifts, then angled south toward Ramsay's towers. The night wind tasted thick. Men sweat, pitch smoke, fear, and beneath it, the faint copper of wolf blood not yet frozen on a rack. From the rampart, Arya watched them go. Her quiet knives crouched beside her. When she whispered now, they slipped into the yard and out the same postern, wearing white cloaks flecked with soot for shadow. Arya stayed behind, eyes narrowing as she studied the enemy camp through a spyglass stolen from a fallen cell sail. She marked the glowing cookfire where wolf torture had taken place. She memorized count of spearmen lounging near wagons. Then she folded the glass and descended to Winterfell's under tunnels, heart hammering. Harbin Slade warmed his hands over a brazier behind the southern siege tower, watching fat crackle from a joint of stolen mutton. The tower loomed half-completed above him, its hides already blackened from last night's flames. Carpenters hammered spikes of green pine to patch the worst damage. Slade ignored them. He cared little for siegecraft. His delight lived in smaller cruelties. Kneeling nearby, an underling flayed strips of hide from the still-twitching juvenile direwolf staked to a pole. Snow hissed where its blood fell. Slade chuckled each time the pup snarled through broken teeth. He believed fear was a kind of currency. Traded enough of it into the night, and even stone walls would buy surrender. But when the dark deepened, the pup froze, its ears cocked toward the woods behind the tower. Slade glanced over his shoulder and saw nothing beyond the fire's halo. Still, he felt the change, air drawing tight as drumskin. He barked at the underling to finish skinning. The man fumbled with his knife, eyes darting to the black pines. Wolves stepped from the tree line, one after another, as though carved from the dark itself. Ghost led. White specter, eyes ember bright. Nymeria flanked him, larger still, fur a smoldering gray. Behind them flowed shapes too numerous to count. Their paws made no sound on the crust. Their eyes kindled a ring of sparks around the siege tower. Slade cursed, jerked his mace free. "Form line," he shouted. But his nearest squad had left posts at dusk to find drink. Only 6 men answered, 2 carpenters, 3 archers half-armored, the flayer with blood on his hands. They huddled near the fire, trying to see beyond its glare. Ghost walked to the edge of light. He looked at the pup, its breath fogging weakly, and something inside him twisted. He gave one single bark, flat and peremptory. The pack scattered. It moved as snowmelt runs through new cracks, splitting, circling, vanishing behind tents. Archers at other posts shouted in alarm. One loosed a quarrel. It hissed into the dark, struck no target, and vanished between trees. Nymeria lunged first. She cleared the brazier, seized the flayer by his scalp, and dragged him screaming into cold night, until screams cut short with sudden thump. Slade swung his mace where she had been, met only air. Ghost sprang next, jaws sealing on the poniard hand of the carpenter, who turned too late. The bones snapped like kindling. The carpenter went down shrieking into the snow as blood spurted. Ghost did not finish him. Momentum carried him past into shadow again. Chaos detonated. Wolves poured through gaps between tents, overturned tables, snapped ropes holding hides around ballista frames. Men woke to darkness alive with teeth. Some reached fires where they could see, only to find that visibility isolated them. Wolves skirted the glow and struck from behind, leaving no enemy to counterstrike. Slade whirled, mace arcing. He glimpsed the white wolf once more, and charged, roaring curses about pelts that would hang in the Dreadfort's hall. Ghost feinted aside. Nymeria raked Slade's thigh with claws that opened flesh to the bone. He staggered but remained upright. Adrenaline forging iron. He smashed the mace across Nymeria's ribs. She snarled, leapt away, and vanished behind supply carts. Slade limped to the wolf pup's stake and cut the rope. He yanked the whimpering creature against his chest, blade now at its throat. Believing hostages held weight, even among beasts. "Come on then," he shouted into the dark. "Come watch your young bleed." Blood from his thigh soaked the pup's fur. The pup moaned. Ghost stepped into the firelight alone, hackles bristling, tail stiff. He advanced one step at a time until Slade saw the enormity of him. Shoulder height of a small horse, amber eyes rimmed crimson. Yet Ghost's growl was low, measured. It said, "Yes, you may kill that cub, but you will have bought nothing, and you will not live long enough to brag." Slade's bravado slipped. Sweat climbed through winter on his brow. He shifted the knife. Ghost's ears flicked, and the red she-wolf behind Slade moved too fast for vision. Her jaws locked on the back of his cap. Tendons parted. Slade screamed. The knife skittered from numb fingers. The pup wriggled free and collapsed. Ghost crossed the remaining space in a single bound. His weight slammed Slade backward. Jaws closed on the man's throat, crushing larynx before teeth met spine. Blood fountained, steaming. Ghost held until the body ceased thrashing. He loosened, panting shallow. The pack emerged from tents, each muzzle gilded in fresh gore. Some guarded periphery, others herded wounded men toward the flickering tower. Wolves would not kill every foe tonight. Fear served better than massacre. But this man, this flayer of pups, could not be allowed to breathe the same world. Nymeria nosed the wounded wolf cub. It whimpered but rose on shaky legs, nuzzling at Ghost's chest. He licked blood from its snout. Then, with a curt chuff, he ordered 2 juveniles to flank the pup and escort it home. They obeyed, guiding it toward the trees, one supporting its weight with shoulder beneath belly. Ghost and Nymeria turned to the siege tower. Behind them, Slade's corpse cooled in snow. Ahead, the tower reared like a dark tooth. Wolves circled its base. Ghost scented pitch inside, waiting barrels stacked near central beam. He circled once, paused at a gap in the hides, and saw the barrels clearly. He barked twice, short, urgent. A brindled wolf dashed to the perimeter, seized a torch fallen from a dead archer, and yanked it free. The flame guttered, but lived. The wolf carried it back, jaws clenched tight, sparks spitting on fur. At Ghost's nod, he flung it through the gap. Pitch caught light like parchment meets candle. Flame raced up scaffolds, painted ribs of pine orange. Carpenters on the highest platforms shrieked as their escape ladders shuddered. Some jumped, flailing into drifts. Others clasped ropes that melted under them. Fire roared a pillar through the night sky, brighter than the 100 cook fires combined. In Winterfell, sentries shouted to the yard, "Tower afire, southern flank!" Sansa reached the wall in time to see the structure collapse inward, timbers crashing like thunder. She pressed gloved fists to her lips, unable to decide whether to weep or cheer. Each burning siege tower meant days of enemy work lost, and days of reprieve for Winterfell. If wolves could burn the second by dawn, the ring around her home would sag like old rope. Inside the camp, panic swamped what little order remained. Ramsay's subcommanders yelled, spittle freezing on beards, ordering men to fetch water from distant wells while snow blew back any bucket half full. Archers fired blindly into woods where only snow shifted. An errant arrow struck a sellsword officer among their own, and his troop retaliated before realizing the mistake. Soon torches flew in every direction, some landing on hides stretched over supply stacks. A careless spark found lamp oil. Another explosion shook the night, sending shockwaves through packed earth to vibrate Winterfell's walls. Ghost withdrew as confusion peaked. He guided his pack north around the moat, skirting where Sansa's bowmen now launched stinging volleys at exposed tents. Wolves and arrows worked in concert, neither crossing the other's path, yet sowing chaos front to back. By the time the pack reached the Godswood postern, the enemy camp resembled a coiled snake crushed under falling rocks, its segments still writhing, but its spine shattered. Dawn crept pale and red-eyed over a battlefield steaming from 100 small fires half smothered by night snow. Winterfell's defenders licked cracked lips at a sight once deemed impossible. The encirclement broken. Whole swaths of tents had vanished, men having fled south with whatever mounts remained. Ziga engines lay charred, wheels frozen in place by refrozen pitch. Only the northern engines, Ramsay's own, stood intact. He had kept them under heavy guard through the night, and thus saved half his might. But half no longer seemed sufficient. Sansa held council in the great hall at first light. Brienne, Arya, Maester Edric, Lord Glover, and Sir Roderick, now stitched and pale but seated, gathered around the high table. A space at Sansa's right remained open, as though for Jon. Ghost occupied it, sitting tall between chairs, tail curled round paws. His presence lent the meeting gravity no signet ring could offer. They spoke of supplies. The Umber's refugees had brought a wagon of grain untouched by Boltons. Combined with stored oats and smoked root vegetables, Winterfell could feed 2,000 mouths 8 more weeks if they thinned gruel with melted snow. They spoke of arms. The forge had turned plowshares into broadheads and dinner knives into boot daggers. They spoke of allies. A raven had come from Bear Island. The Mormonts promised 50 archers and 20 shield maidens, whenever the strait's ice thinned enough for travel. And they spoke of the enemy. Bolton banners still flew north of the keep, but scouts reported infighting. Half the hirelings threatened mutiny unless paid double. Ramsay had executed 3 for desertion at dawn, nailing them by tongues to a barricade. The act quieted dissent, but only its voice, not its heart. Discussion turned to Ghost's raids. Talk of wolves stirred half-formed awe around the table. Sir Roderick swore the heart tree leaves had rustled as though cheering when the tower collapsed. Arya pressed a finger over her lips, cautioning silence lest they tempt the gods with pride. She suggested smaller strikes next. Shredding grain sacks, spooking horses tethered too near fire, poisoning water barrels with wolf dung. Each idea sketched a new fracture in the enemy's will. Sansa gave approval, but added human sorties. She tasked Brienne to lead night raids with the quiet knives, ghosting in behind the wolves, cutting pike shafts in half, unstringing longbows, sabotaging catapults that the wolves could not reach. Brienne accepted, though her eyes flicked to Podrick. He nodded, wordlessly promising to keep pace. Maester Edric stooped over scrolls, coughed for attention. He proposed a bolder gambit. Send word to the scattered smallfolk that Winterfell's gates were open for refuge. Each new mouth would strain rations, but each carried arms of loyalty sharper than any spear. If displaced families flooded Bolton's supply lanes, they would force Ramsay to choose between butchering innocents or diverting guards. Either choice squandered resources. Sansa hesitated only a heartbeat. She told the maester to write the call. Ghost listened, head tilting at the mention of innocents fleeing. He could picture thin children in threadbare cloaks trudging through night, wolves at their tails for protection against worse predators. He would have to post sentries along those routes, four-legged ones. When council ended, Sansa placed her palm on Ghost's broad skull. "You are half our army," she murmured. So low none but he and perhaps Arya heard. "Guard them." Ghost nuzzled her wrist gently, felt the soft pulse there, the warm current of human courage, so unlike his own yet no less real. Jon Snow rode beneath lowering skies streaked pewter. He had turned from the King's Road 2 days earlier, plunging west over the barrow fields of the rills. His cloak hung stiff with frost. He had slept little, though each night he felt Ghost's presence like a campfire in the storm. The connection grew hotter as he neared Winterfell, until his dreams blurred. He saw flame, tumbling towers, a white wolf's jaws crimson in moonlight. These visions woke him gasping, heart thrashing like a caught trout. Davos rode 3 lengths behind, wheezing curses at the cold, while the handful of spearmen they had gathered from Barter Town trudged sullenly. They had lost their horses to a roving band of Bolton scouts who mistook them for smugglers. Jon had killed 2 with Longclaw, but the 3rd had fled with the mounts. Still Jon pushed on, telling Davos that something guided him more surely than any horse. Early that morning he found a series of paw prints etched in the snow beside the road. Wolf, yet enormous. He knew them for Ghost's pack. They pointed north, as clear as signage. Close to dusk, they reached a burned hamlet near Widow's Watch. Smoke still rose from blackened rafters. Jon found bodies stacked near the well, flayed of skin. His jaw hardened, but he spoke no vow of vengeance. Vows were useless to the dead. He sought survivors and found only one, a toddler bundled under her mother's corpse for warmth. Jon cradled her. She did not cry. Her voice had frozen away. He swaddled her in spare furs and carried her the rest of the march. Ghost felt that small heartbeat through their bond, and something inside him keened. He lifted his muzzle from the Godswood stream and loosed a call that startled ravens from the rookery. Wolves near and far froze, listening. The bond told them, protect any child that bears the scent of this one. They understood. Across hills and glens, wild wolves stirred from dens and padded south to flank the roads. By the 3rd night, since the first assault, Ramsay's host stood half its muster. His lieutenant's charred corpse hung from the last remaining tower, a warning to both men and wolves, though it served only to keep the smell of burned flesh in the frozen air. Ramsay paced before his war council, pale eyes bright as lightning, voice cold. He forbid further torture of wolves. No more bait, because it achieved nothing but provoked wrath. He ordered pikes driven into the snow every 10 feet, points angled outward like hedge thorns. He commanded archers to coat their shafts in wildfire paste, pilfered from King's Landing caches, and promised 10 gold dragons for every looping pelt delivered to him before dawn. His captains bowed, but their hearts rolled like dice between cracked knuckles. They saw the wolves not merely as beasts, but as omen, the north itself rising against them. Some whispered that the heart trees had summoned the pack, that killing one invited curses older than old Valeria. Ramsay heard these rumors and smiled. Fear, he believed, was only currency if he alone minted it. He would twist their dread back on itself. At moonrise, Ramsay mounted his horse, black barding stitched with pink flayed man. He took 50 riders armed with curved sabers meant for slashing through forest thickets. He meant to ride a wide arc, sweep behind Winterfell, and catch the wolves at their lair within the Godswood. Either he would return with pelts, or he would not return at all. There was no third path. Ghost sensed the sortie as soon as the picket lines drew back to let horses through. He felt vibrations through snow crust, the distant chime of bridles. Nymeria raised her muzzle from the carcass of a stag and stared into the wind. Ghost touched noses with her, and the decision passed like lightning. They would intercept to the east, ceding the Godswood entrance to Arius human scouts who had prepared traps of their own. Wolves would strike horse legs, hamstring and run, while the quiet knives darted from shadow to finish riders. Snow muffled hoofbeats, but horses still tossed heads, spooked by the scent of predators. Riders yanked reins, spurs flashing. Somewhere ahead an owl hooted. A rider loosed an arrow blindly. It struck a comrade's helm and ricocheted, shredding an ear. Ramsay flayed him alive on the spot. The screams chased through the column until not even the wind dared approach them. At the same moment farther south, small folk refugees following Maester Edric's ravens crept along the ruined King's Road. They numbered more than 100, families with sledges piled high with turnips, onions, rag-bundled infants. Wolves padded either flank, silent escorts. The small folk knew the tales of direwolves, yet desperation overcame fear. When a mother stumbled and her babe slid from her arms, a gray wolf nudged the swaddled child back to safety. When an old man's heart failed, the wolves climbed the ridge and howled, and from the gloom came 4 Stark riders from Winterfell's watch to guide the column. Refugees entered the castle by lantern light, as Ramsay's hunters reached the stand of pines east of the moat. Ghost waited there, crouched low among trunks, his breath plumed steady, bones thrumming like bowstrings. He counted heartbeats, measured distances, waited for the enemy to pass the invisible line Nymeria. And he had agreed upon. The first horse crossed. Ghost exploded forward, jaws clamping its cannon bone. The leg shattered. Horse and rider toppled. The crash spooked the second mount, which reared. Nymeria's jaws found its throat. Panic rippled down the column. Riders wielded blades, slashed at shadows. A wolf yelped as steel found shoulder, but 3 more piled on the offending steed, dragging it sideways. Men tumbled into snow, blinded by darkness, striking at wind. Through sleet of hooves, Ghost saw Ramsay at the tail, smiling in near ecstasy as he spurred his horse straight at the fray. Ramsay's scream of delight cut above the chaos. He swung a torch soaked in wildfire, the green flames sputtering hellish glow. Ghost recoiled from the unnatural heat. Ramsay's horse plunged through gnashing jaws, trampling a wolf. Hooves struck Ghost's hind leg. Pain flared like forged iron. Ghost staggered, rolled, came up limping. Nymeria barked a command. 2 wolves leapt for Ramsay, but he slashed with saber, severing ear, cleaving muzzle. Blood sprayed in arcs. Ramsay laughed. Then Arya appeared as if conjured by the laugh itself. She shot from beneath a low branch, snow debris bursting where she pushed off. Needle flashed. A sliver of shadow. Ramsay parried, eyes wild. He did not know this slender assassin, but her face shone savage in wildfire glow. She ducked under saber, thrust upward, missed ribs by half an inch. Ramsay kicked. Her breath left in grunt. She rolled aside. Wolves circled, unable to close while either human held the brutal torch. Arya regained crouch. Ramsay flicked his wrist. The torch spun toward her. She jumped back. Fire kissed her cloak hem, igniting it. She shrugged free, cloak falling to curl in green tongues at her feet. Ramsay thrust saber, but Arya stepped within his reach, seized wrist, twisted. Saber fell. She headbutted his chin. Cartilage cracked. Ramsay reeled. Ghost lunged despite the pain, teeth closing on Ramsay's sword arm as Arya's dagger found his gut. Ramsay shrieked. Half pain, half rapture. Jerked free, stumbled back, clutching wound. He staggered toward his panicked horse, tried to mount. Nymeria bit calf. He fell. Snow stained black and green under pooled wildfire. But before final blow fell, runners with horns sounded from west. A fresh cavalry coming. Bolton reserves sent when first screams reached camp. 30 riders with lantern masts bore down. Arya hissed frustration. She and wolves could slay Ramsay now, but risk encirclement. Ghost released Ramsay reluctantly, barking a command. The pack fled into pines, Arya bounding beside them. She turned once to see Ramsay crawling to a rangy captain, who hauled him onto a saddle and galloped away. Blood spilled from his belly. Every bounce shed more life. Arya hoped he would bleed out before dawn. Yet hope was for later. They fell back toward Winterfell, retreat shielded by archers on rampart who peppered pursuing riders until they broke off. Ghost limped through the postern last, Nymeria at his side, Arya panting behind. Inside, healers rushed to them. One tried to wash Ghost's leg, but he shook head until they fetched boiled water cooled to just warmth. Nymeria sat while arrow fragments were plucked. She did not whimper once. Sansa arrived, eyes taking everything. She touched Arya's charred cloak, her sister's singed hair, Ghost's wound. No words. Only nods. We continue. By pre-dawn light, Maester Edric's raven returned from White Harbor. Lady Manderly pledged 5 long ships of grain and 400 spears if Winterfell held 1 fortnight more. Glover scouts rode in. Ramsay lay gravely wounded, his camp in uproar. The Dreadfort's maester had been sent for, but snowdrifts barred fast travel. Rumor claimed Ramsay's entrails had slipped into his thigh, and he was dying by inches. Tale fit for song. Sansa heard but did not smile. Bolton forces would not dissolve with their lord's death. A half-dozen rivals waited to claim command. Tigers sometimes fought harder after their trainer died. Ghost rested only an hour. Dawn's pale blue seeped through arrow embrasures when he rose, tested weight on the wounded hind leg. Pain thrummed but bones held. He limped to Godswood. Nymeria followed, and behind them the cub they saved, now bandaged, tottered like promise. They drank from the weirwood pool. Blood diluted into ripples of red that spread across reflected sky. The heart tree watched, silent. Bran's presence brushed them again, softer than owl feathers. Through Ghost he saw Ramsay's deathbed, a tent lit by guttering candles, a healer stitching skin as water froze in bowl. Bran withdrew, leaving memory of snow on eyelids, hint of what comes after. Ghost turned away. The future belonged to men made of grief and duty. Wolves existed only in the living moment. The next hunt, the next heartbeat. In the courtyard, archers strung new hemp lines for drying fletchings. Children from the refugee convoy gathered stale crusts to feed chickens. A smith hammered glowing steel into a pump for the well so winter's ice would not choke it. Life layered itself atop night's savagery like new snow covers blood. Ghost breathed it in, the scent of tenacity older than tears. Pain lanced his leg. He licked the wound once and dismissed the sting. He trotted to the southern turret, where Arya leaned against Merlin, studying the camp through morning haze. She turned as he arrived, stroked his ruff. "We'll need a bigger graveyard," she murmured. Ghost huffed. Agreement or jest? She couldn't tell. But his eyes gleamed brighter than winter sun. 2 riders approached the castle from the southeast. Davos in weather-scoured cloak, and Jon Snow bearing a silent child in his arms. Ghost's heart leapt so sharply he barked before he knew it. Every wolf in forest answered. Jon saw white shapes on battlement and nudged his horse onward, tears freezing in his beard. He had come home on the threat of a howl. When the gates opened, he crossed the yard amid hush. Sansa descended the steps, Arya at her flank, Brienne beside. Jon dismounted, passed the child to a midwife, and folded into his sister's arms. No one spoke. The wind carried every syllable they could not. Ghost circled them once, brushed Jon's hip, then sat before them, head level with Jon's heart. The man laid a gloved hand on that head and closed his eyes. Refugees peered from archways. Smiths paused mid-blow. Guards dropped hands from hilts. In the godswood, the heart tree bent beneath Snow's weight, as though nodding. Wolves slipped from shadows to ring the courtyard, 40 heartbeats breathing steam into bright air, tails low in peace, but eyes keen. Men flinched but did not back away. The alliance had formed in tooth and flame. Now it sealed in silent witness. Jon knelt to Ghost, breath thick. "You kept them," he whispered. Ghost nosed his forehead. In that touch flowed nights of siege, burning towers, the snap of bones under hoof, and the thump of Arya's heartbeat in moonlit charge. Jon rose, gaze sweeping walls. He saw the breaches patched with rough lumber, the children carrying buckets, the soot stripes up keepstones. He turned to Sansa. "We finished this," he said. She answered with the ghost of a smile. They did not need more words. Brienne briefed Jon on enemy numbers. Roderick described the divided camps. Davos spoke of ships in White Harbor. Arya named every captain by weakness. One feared fire, one lacked night vision, one hoarded gold and would flee if offered safe passage. Strategies spun like loom threads. But the next strike belonged first to wolves. Nymeria pressed closer to Jon, sniffed his gloves, then trotted outside. Her pack followed. Branch of one great family grown anew. Ghost limped behind, but Jon ordered gate opened again. He would stand watch on the parapet and learn how wolves map war. When wolves vanished into swirling flurries, Jon and sisters climbed to the highest tower, facing north where Ramsay lay dying. Wind knifed their cheeks. Jon drew Longclaw, rested it on stone. Sansa laid her hand on the pommel. Arya set needle across, metal kissing metal. 3 blades, 3 siblings, 1 cause. Below, the castle buzzed. Hammers, prayers, small child laughter muffled by scarf. In the distance, a column of crows spiraled above Ramsay's camp. Ghost and Nymeria loped beneath them, invisible save for flicker of movement where snow parted. The war would stretch again across nightfall, and maybe another after that. But each dawn Winterfell stood would sink dread deeper into enemy bone. Time stretched on. Snow fell without hurry, layering footprints, smoothing scarred earth. Ghost bounded a ridge, leg pain forgotten in the rhythm. From far behind, Jon's whistle cut through wind, a sound they had used on the wall. Ghost paused, raised head, and answered with low howl. The sound carried back, promising stories yet unwritten. At the ridge's foot, the rescued wolf pup trotted with newfound strength, ears pricked. It yipped once, silly in joy. Nymeria snarled quietly, discipline, but her tail swung. Ghost looked east, beyond siege lines, beyond next hill, to where the world curved into unseen. He did not imagine aftermaths or songs. He felt only now, the clean bite of air, the trembling earth beneath endless paws, and the fierce bright certainty that while wolves drew breath, Winterfell would not kneel. He ran, pack streaming after, into a day that promised hunt and blood, and at its fading edge, perhaps, a dawn free of torches. Behind him, Winterfell's banners flapped. Direwolf on field of white, unburnt, unbowed, stitched anew with fresh threads that would not tear. Within those walls, children dreaming of warmth, now dreamt also of fur and fang racing across a snowbound world, on errands of salvation. The storm's heart beat on. Wolves ran Dotyo, and somewhere between each heartbeat, the north remembered its name. Ika. The wind lay heavy on the ramparts as midday drained toward another charcoal dusk, and in that suspended hush Jon Snow felt the weight of being home and not home at once. A prodigal lord in a castle still half stranger. The courtyard below bustled with an energy at odds with the sky. Cauldrons of pitch hissed over braziers, arrows were fletched in frantic rhythm, and the smith's hammers rang the metronome of survival. Refugee children scampered between barrels, scavenging splinters for kindling, their laughter threading the air with a fragile, desperate hope. Ghost paced the stone beside Jon, white fur rippling over lean muscle, crimson eyes vigilant, his wounded leg no longer dragged, a testament to Maester Edric's poultice of pine resin and powdered stinging nettle. Jon kept one hand buried in that fur, drawing strength from its primal warmth. He listened to Brienne lay out the noon patrol rotations until her measured tones blurred into the general clamor of a keep preparing for storm. Suddenly all sound cut away beneath a single cry, a raven caw so sharp it seemed to split the clouds. Jon glanced skyward and spotted the black bird banking toward the rookery, blue wax sealing the scroll bound to its leg. Moments later, the Raven Master stumbled onto the rampart, half bowing as he thrust the parchment into Sansa's waiting hands. She rocked on her heels, eyes scanning the lines with the swiftness of one accustomed to carrying burdens quietly. Then she exhaled, slow and thin, and passed the message to Jon. Lady Manderly's sigil stamped the bottom. 5 long ships of grain already sailing for Deepwood Motte. 400 spears would march overland with Galbart Glover, once the rivers iced firm enough to bear the wagons. But the tide of promise carried darker undertow. The Ironborn, unmoored from any king in Pike after Euron's disappearance at sea, raided the stony shore in marauder bands. They'd torched hamlets, rounding up livestock and salt wives alike. Lady Sabelle Locke begged Winterfell for reprieve. Jon's gut twisted. "We can't send men," he muttered. "Not now." "No," Sansa agreed, voice brittle as frost. "But we can send warning. And we can send wolves." Ghost's ears pricked. Beside him, Nymeria slunk from shadow, as though summoned by thought alone. Jon crouched, meeting her amber gaze. "Would you go that far?" he asked softly, fully aware she understood intent even if she missed every word. Nymeria merely huffed, jaw tightening, the silent promise of teeth. Ghost stretched his scarred hind leg, brushed his muzzle against Jon's cheek, then bumped Nymeria's shoulder. Decision sealed. Jon straightened. 8 feet first light, a dozen wolves go west. They'll harry the raiders, drive them back to their ships. Or into the sea, Arya finished, stepping out with that half-smile which always made Sansa tighten her grip on patience and pride. "I'll choose a shadow team to skirt the coastline and loose the signal torches if the Ironborn land again." Brienne frowned. "That strips Winterfell thin." "So does famine," Sansa countered. "We hold here, but we protect the land beyond. The north is more than stone walls. They'll send word of our weakness," Lord Glover warned, beard iced white around his breath. Arya fixed him with a cool stare. "Let them speak of wolves instead." The debate spiraled into logistics. Supply packs for Arya's rangers, honey cakes for incenting child scouts, saddle modifications for crippled shoulders. Yet Jon's focus drifted to the horizon where enemy tents sagged like rotten teeth in a mouthful of slush. Bolton banners still fluttered, but their cadence looked wrong, halting, unconfident, as if stitched to the poles with thread unraveling. By sunset, scouts confirmed it. Ramsay Bolton clung to life in a fever delirium, blood poisoning veining his abdomen black. Rumor said he raved at invisible hounds tearing his flesh, begged them to feed on anyone else. His captains argued succession in the open fists curled on sword pommels, each biding nightfall to make their play. Chaos beckoned like a lover who promised both pleasure and death. Night dropped quick and moonless, a velvet bag shaken over the world. Ghost guided his diminished pack through the postern again. Only 15 tonight. Lean veterans who moved with the hush of drifting ash. Nymeria took 7 westwards, slipping into deeper forest. Ghost angled southeast, ears tuned not for men or dogs but for something subtler. The hum of quarrel within the enemy heart. Soon ragged voices reached him. Mercenaries bickering at a dice circle. Wagers hinging on which Bolton banner might be flayed half next. He studied the camp from a rocky berm, snow crust glimmering faintly. The siege towers were cindered stumps. Carts lay overturned. Makeshift barricades of sharpened stakes ringed the inner command tents where torches still dared burn. And around that flicker cluster knotted a throng of riders, each banner stitched with personal ambition. House Dustin's red horse, House Riswell's black calf, the mailed fist of the Dreadfort's lesser cousins. A brawl simmered, fueled by ale and fear. Ghost heard steel slide free of scabbards, smelled the dread sweat of men who realized their own allies might slit their throats before the wolves ever returned. He barked once. Soft, throaty. Two shadows uncoiled from pine to his right. Arya's quiet knives, faces soot-blacked, cloaks bleached pale. They conveyed silent report by gesture. Brienne's sortie poised at the northern siege tower, ready to torch pitch barrels stacked anew. Arya herself was already inside the enemy cordon, disguised in ragged leather as a wounded camp girl. Ghost's hackles fluttered at the thought, but trust ran deeper than worry. He gave the knives a nod. Strange communion between beast and men, and they slipped off toward the tower. Ghost prowled downhill, weaving through bracken, until a sentry's torch hissed mere yards away. He froze, fur blending with snow and shadow. The sentry shivered, stomped boots, muttered about bloody witch wolves under his breath, and wandered on. Ghost exhaled steam ghosting from Maw, and skirted the outer lantern line. Inside the command ring, Harston Risewell faced Dustin across a spitted hog's carcass. Savory fat dripped to the coals, yet no one ate. Daggers lay flat on wrists. Accusations rang sharper than steel. They argued who would lead at Dawn's assault, whose men would hold the breached western wall, who would claim Winterfell's vaults should Sansa surrender. None referenced Ramsay anymore. He already lay in a fever coma, nursemaid's task only to keep breath in him long enough for captains to legitimize their gains. Ghost waited for the moment when voices rose into true violence. It came with a single shove. Riswell's nephew slapping Dustin's son so hard teeth flew. Swords flashed. Horses screamed. Mercenaries scrambled for vantage. Ghost loosed a howl, and his pack answered, erupting from darkness with ferocity newly forged by grief. They did not attack the captains directly. Instead, they fell on tethered steeds, hamstrung pickets, and smashed pitch barrels against embers. Flame whooshed skyward, catching on saddle blankets soaked in grease to keep them supple. Stallions bolted, dragging half-armored men into ice. Panic scattered lines. In the confusion, Brienne's team lit the northern tower, second-to-last structure still intact, and hauled the Scorpion ballista off its platform, sending it cartwheeling through tents. Arya thrust from crowd to crowd, unseen, cutting straps on bulging money sacks, scattering gold coins across trampled snow. Greed outpaced fear. Sellsword's dove to snatch coin while arrows hissed overhead, and friends forgot friends. By midnight, the army of Bolton sigils had splintered into a dozen feral packs, each mistrusting the next. When dawn finally bled through clouds, their banners lay toppled beside frozen bodies, encrusted in self-inflicted wounds. The siege ring no longer existed, only pockets of men wondering how they'd been routed by teeth and rumor. Inside Winterfell, morning found Jon in the Godswood. He knelt before the heart tree, gloved fingertips pressed to its scarlet trunk. Frost feathered his beard. "If you watch," he murmured to whatever spirit swayed the bleeding leaves, "then let them see us through one more night." Snow sifted from branches, settling in his hair like white ash. A soft crunch made him turn. Sansa approached, cloak cinched with a direwolf clasp forged last night from melted tableware. She carried a jug of mead spiced with juniper. "You look too much like father when you brewed," she said, pouring 2 small horn cups. He took one, the rim stinging his cracked lips. They drank in silence. When the last drop burned his throat, Jon handed back the cup. "I'll parley at noon," he said. Her brows braided worry. "They could kill you out there. They could storm these walls tomorrow if we don't end this tonight. Better risk one life than all." "You're not just one life, Jon. You're king to half the North whether you claim it or not." "I'm a brother," he corrected gently. "And I won't have my sister's home turn charnel." Ghost padded from the fallen snow mound behind them, head tilting. Jon scratched behind the direwolf's left ear, the spot that made his crimson eyes briefly flutter. "Hell watch me," Jon said. "So will the old gods." Sansa set her cup on a root, staring up at the heart tree's face. "Then I'll watch for your return," she whispered. At high noon, Jon rode through the sundered gatehouse on a shaggy gray mare, too small for grand procession. Symbolism deliberate. Ghost loped beside. Ahead, the shattered remains of Bolton Command struggled to assemble dignity. Harston Risewell and Lady Barbary Dustin fronted a cluster of half-starved captains beneath a field banner, with every sigil stitched over the flayed man in awkward collage. That patchwork flag wilted in wind until it resembled flesh more than cloth. Jon advanced to 10 paces, reined it in, and lifted no visor. He wore none, only furs. Ghost sat, tail sweeping slow arcs. Silence stretched until creak of dying fires punctuated the cold. "I am Jon Snow," he called, voice carrying the iron of winter rivers. "I speak for Sansa Stark in Winterfell." Ricewell bristled. "Stark bitch. Holds nothing but Winterfell," Jon cut, "and the loyalty of every soul who holds the North dear. You've burned towns, flayed innocents, doused your own in pitch. Your lord bleeds his life away as we speak. End this siege, disarm, and you'll walk south with food and furs enough to reach the twins. Persist, and the wolves finish what they began." Lady Dustin's features, elegant in bone, cruel in eye, twitched. "And what of Barrowton? My folk starve this winter while the wolves feast on umber grain. I march home with nothing." "No. March home with your people alive," Jon answered. "Or stay and feed the snows your corpses." Murmurs rippled behind the captains. Deserters trickling from last night's chaos whispered of a shadow girl who cut gold free. Greed couched its head to fear now. They stared at the white wolf and saw the jaws of winter gaping. But one voice spat defiance. Carl Karstark, bastard cousin to the Karstark heir, his armor dented and shield cracked. "This is still a battle," he growled. "The North bends knee to strength. Slaughter the pup and his cur, then take the castle while their wolves run to save him. Main." He spurred forward, sword flashing. Ricewell barked for order, but too late. Ghost sprang, intercepting the horse's charge, jaws clamping the reins. The mare reared, Karstark thrown sideways. He hit ground, rolled, came up sword high, but Jon was already there, Longclaw a gray blur. Steel met steel. Karstark's first cut rang. His second glanced off Valyrian. Jon riposted, slicing pauldron leather. Karstark snarled, pressed. Each clash sparked echoes off broken wagons. Ghost circled, waiting, hackles bristling if any dared intervene. None moved, frozen by the swirl of bright steel and the knowledge that here, perhaps, the siege's fate hung. In 3 breaths, Jon shifted his weight, parried wide, drove elbow to Karstark's jaw. "You." Stunned. The man staggered. Jon pivoted, swept leg, sent him sprawling. Longclaw leveled at Karstark's throat, black-rimed edge inches from carotid. "Yield," Jon said. Karstark spat blood. "Boltons never yield." "You're no Bolton." He tried to lunge. Ghost pounced, paw pinning sword arm. Fangs bared near ear. Karstark whimpered, the sound of defiance crumbling to dust. Jon glanced up. Ricewell and Dustin exchanged a look heavy with calculus. Where stood advantage? Blood loss, starvation, wolves. Fractured allies. Against these, a castle ready for winter and banners, rallying to stark calls from every direction. The sum revealed itself like dawn through gloom. Ricewell unsheathed slowly, turned his blade flat, offered hilt to Jon. The Ricewells yield. One by one the others followed. Lady Dustin last, face bleak but resolute. She surrendered a bronze dagger etched with runes older than Andal's. Jon collected each weapon, handing them to a Stark outrider who rode forward from the gate. "The flayed banners burn tonight," Jon declared. "Any who choose exile travel south at first light. Food wagons wait by Oak Barrel Bridge. Swear no vengeance, no return to Bolton claim, and be free." "And the ones who stay?" asked Dustin, voice a cracked whisper. "They stay to aid Winterfell," Sansa called, stepping from the now open gate. Crimson cloak fluttering. The North rebuilds together, or it dies alone. No cheers erupted, weariness muffled throats. Yet in that gray hush, something shifted, resentment easing its claws, suspicion lowering eyes. They would not love the Starks tonight, but they would follow, and in following might heal. The next 2 days blurred. Disarmed soldiers escorted to stockades outside the wall. Refugees billeted in every room large enough for straw pallets. Supply manifests redrawn. Wild wolves guided ironborn marauders into ambushes on the shore. Nymeria dragging a reaver captain's helm back to show Arya like a trophy. The Manderley grain ships reached Deepwood Mott on dawn's high tide. Columns of white-cloaked men tramped inland bearing sacks, marked with blue mermaids. Lady Mormont herself arrived astride a shaggy pony tall as her pride, marching into the hall to berate Jon for allowing Bolton scum to breathe. He took the scolding as due penance and earned her grudging grin. Ramsay Bolton died the third night after parley, fever devouring him to delirium. No maester could staunch the rot. His last words, so the nurse claimed, were pleas for the hounds to stand down. I beg you. I beg. Cut off by his own blood froth, Sansa ordered his body buried beyond the walls, face down, no cairn, lest some loyalist try grave robbery for relics. Snow fell in soft flakes during the burial, settling on Ramsay's upturned soles. Ghost watched from a distance, tail swishing once. The ground received the corpse with neither protest nor blessing. It was simple mass returned to earth. Winterfell breathed again. Fires burned in hearths. The great kitchens produced rabbit stew that tasted almost celebratory. Yet Jon paced ramparts nightly, weighing perils that lingered. Ironborn daring a larger raid, southern politics shifting when word of Bolton defeat reached King's Landing. And the ancient dread beyond the wall that ravens whispered of, queer sightings of dead bears shambling near Last Heart's ruins? He felt peace only beside Ghost, and even then, it was peace like quiet before an avalanche. One twilight, he found Arya atop the first keep, feet dangling over black drop. She held needle across her knees, wiping the blade with oiled cloth. Ghost padded to her side. She smiled, ruffling his fur like a playful sibling. Hard parts done, she said. Jon folded arms on Merlon. Hard parts never done. We won a battle, not the winter. She shrugged. Battles or winters, same thing. You keep moving or you freeze. Do you want to keep moving, little sister? His voice carried grief for a childhood they barely shared. She pondered the horizon, where the faint purple glow beyond treetops hinted at far-off hearthfires. I thought revenge would feel heavier, she admitted. But Ramsay's dead and I'm just me. Maybe that's enough. Ghost licked her knuckles, tasting iron oil. She laughed, soft, and leaned into his warmth. Jon rested a hand on each of their shoulders, grounding himself between sibling and sentinel. Behind them, Winterfell's tower bells chimed second watch. Brienne's footsteps echoed up the stair. She carried a fresh parchment. Raven from the wall, she announced, brow creased. Jon accepted it, eyes scanning quickly. His heart hammered. Lord Commander wants me back, he said. Wildling scouts swear they saw something. White shadows on Skirling Pass. Arya's breath steamed faster. Walkers. Could be. He looked down at the courtyard where freed captives chopped wood beside Stark soldiers, where children wove pine garlands for the feast Sansa hoped would unite refugee and defender. How to leave now? Yet how to ignore the wall's call? Ghost nuzzled his hip, crimson eyes clear. Jon nodded. We'll go, he told the direwolf. Then to Arya. You stay, defend Sansa. She touched needle to her forehead in salute. The North remembers. Sansa met them at the base of the keep, reading the message over Jon's shoulder. Worry flickered but did not take root. Instead resolve hardened. You'll take 200 spears, she ordered. Glover volunteers, Mormont archers. The wall needs proof of northern strength as much as swords. He opened his mouth to argue paucity of men, but she lifted a hand. Winterfell stands because of wolves and ghosts and stubborn hearts. It will still stand when you return. And because her faith outweighed his fear, Jon accepted. The departure dawn glinted off hoarfrost webbing every courtyard stone. Sansa watched from the gatehouse parapet, cloak wrapped tight. Below, Jon mounted a black courser, Ghost prowling ahead, already scouting for invisible hazards. 200 riders filed into column, Mormont green surcoats, Risewell red horse now realigned beneath Stark banners, even a half-dozen ex-Sellswords wearing blank shields, eager to prove loyalty to new paymasters. Arya squeezed Jon's arm. I hid food in your saddle roll. Honeyed oatcakes, like old times. He choked on a laugh. Old times were sour mutton and hardtack. Improvement then. Brienne swung astride her destrier. Oathkeeper, humming against scabbard. Podrick gripped reins beside her, face pale but steady. Lady Mormont rode front rank, voice already chastising the line for crooked spacing. Jon looked back at Sansa. She inclined her head just once, command and blessing combined. Then he wheeled his horse and shouted the order. Hooves thudded over drawbridge, banners snapped. Ghosts' howl pierced the morning, answered by packs hidden in the forest, escorting them north. Sansa lowered her gaze to the courtyard where the rescued direwolf cub sprawled before the smithy, gnawing a deer shank. It would grow enormous, she thought, if winter allowed. She turned toward the hall. Work awaited. A feast to bind fractured hearts, grain tallies, new laws to pen for pardoned houses, letters to draft to White Harbor, and King's Landing alike so one would not suspect the other. Winterfell needed voice as much as sword. The heart tree rustled, snow shedding like shifting sighs. Somewhere in its sap-bleeding bark, Sansa fancied she saw a new line, the vague carve of a wolf's profile, etched overnight by wind and frost. She traced it with her eyes, then walked on, boots crunching. The north began again today, on ground watered by terror and courage both, and she would tend it. The ghosts of Winterfell, man and beast, still walked, but now they walked beside the living, guiding footfall. Outside the walls, a lone crow followed Joan's column, black wings riding dawn thermals. Ghost bounded at lead, leg heeled strong, untiring. Every so often he glanced back at ramparts until Winterfell dwindled to a smudge of stone in endless white. Then he faced forward, ears angled, nose sifting frigid wind. The road stretched north, through land scarred but not broken, toward a wall older than half-forgotten promises. Snow began to fall. Soft at first, then thick, swirling. Riders hunched against cold. Ghost quickened, blazing path through drifts, a pale spirit against rising storm. In his trail, men found resolve, forging onward through curtain of winter, because the direwolf did not falter. And if the direwolf did not, neither would they. Behind them Winterfell pulsed with new breath, forge fires roaring, children singing, wolves patrolling ramparts as dusk lowered again. Somewhere in deep vaults, old stark swords whispered against each other, as if remembering hands not yet born. And above, in skies bruised violet, the first stars pricked through storm cloud, steady beacons over a castle, saved by fang and flame, awaiting dawns that might yet bear darker tests, but also the stubborn glint of hope no winter could extinguish. Thus the siege ended, not with kingdom's coronation, nor trumpeted glory, but with wounded wolves licking scars beside fires while children learned to laugh again. A fragile peace, perhaps, but peace enough for hearts to mend until the next howl rose, calling north and life and death together beneath the old god's silent, snow-sifted gaze. E.K. Snow gathered in mute drifts along the King's Road, piling knee-deep against the charred trunks of last year's wildfires, so that the black scars poked through white like half-remembered sins. Jon Snow rode with his ragged column into that hush, breath pluming, long claw strapped across his back, and the weight of old vows pressed harder than the sword belt. Every hoof-fall sounded muffled, as if the world kept its finger to its lips. Somewhere just ahead Ghost loped, a white flicker weaving across snow-coated roots, paws throwing no more noise than the settling flakes. Now and again, the direwolf halted, crimson eyes shining back down the winding file of riders, making sure the two-legged pack still followed the line had broken through the powder. Behind Jon, the company stretched in two ragged threads. Mormont archers in green and silver, Glover spearmen in ox-blood leather, patched with homespun, and a scattering of Risewell horse lancers, who had sworn to die for Winterfell rather than face Sansa's quiet displeasure a second time. Brienne kept the rear guard, Oathkeeper across her knees. Podrick huddled on the spare destrier behind her, mumbling a Tavitan prayer against frostbite. At the vanguard, young Lady Lyanna Mormont led from a shaggy stallion, inclining its frosted beard with every step. The girl's face looked carved of Winterfell stone. Lips blue at the corners, eyes blazing. No one dared offer her a blanket. Their second night out, they reached a half-burned inn clinging to the western verge of the road. Smoke stains streaked the shutters where some fleeing small folk had tried to board themselves inside, and then surrendered to flame. Jon ordered the doors torn away, ashes raked clear, and canvas lashed across the gaps for shelter. Wolves faded into the surrounding woods, while men kindled 5 meager fires. Casks of bear fat they'd hauled on sledges were cracked and melted into kettles, so the oil could be rubbed across exposed faces. The air reeked of rancid musk, but everyone's cheeks turned less blue. Jon chewed a strip of raw venison and passed the haunch down to Lyanna, who gnawed without fuss, eyes fixed on the dark tree line. "There are things out there," she said between bites. He followed her gaze. Beyond the flames, the forest vibrated with small, almost silent breaths. Eyes catching embers for a heartbeat, then winking out. "Ghost's kin," he answered, though he could not be sure. The bond with his wolf thrummed stronger each league north. But the night muttered other songs as well. He heard them sometimes when he drifted near Dream, a whisper like wind threading a ruined wall. Voices chanting in a tongue older than High Valyrian, older than leaf and stone. Each morning he woke with frost jeweling his eyebrows, and a sense that something vast had bent to examine him while the fires sank low. On the third day, the snow hissed sideways beneath a cutting wind out of Skagos. The drifts rose to swallow the road entirely. Davos cursed every island god he'd once abandoned and suggested they turn west a league to follow a frozen tributary of the last river. Ghost cocked his head as Jon weighed the risk and then trotted deliberately toward that river course, as if taking command himself. Jon gave a curt nod. Banners shifted. They bent left. By dusk the column found the river clogged with ice pans, thick as armory doors. They marched single file across, ice groaning under each hoof, the sound echoing down the canyon like distant drums. At the midpoint, a Mormont packhorse slipped, foreleg vanishing into a fresh crack. The beast screamed. The ice split wider, swallowing saddle and grain sacks in a single shudder. Brienne leapt from her destrier, rope already coiled, but the horse plunged before she could knot the noose. A hush swallowed its last wicker. No one spoke until every rider stood safe on the far bank. And then whispers ran like mice. The river wanted tithe. The old gods remembered oaths. They pressed on through dwarf pine stands humming with buried creeks. Ice crystals rattled in the needles each time the wind swayed them. Past twilight they broke into a clearing where the ruins of an old watchtower jutted. Here Jon called halt. They hacked spruce and cedar, built fires in a crescent, and ringed the camp with triplines made of horsehair and pheasant bells. Ghost hatted the perimeter, sniffing each knot. When the last spark of sunset bled away, the forest exhaled a breath so cold it crystallized tears before they could slip past lashes. Sentries took first watch. Jon tried to sleep, but dreams chased one another beneath his skull. A wall of ice chimneying with cracks. A heart tree as tall as the sky weeping red sap over a field of Direwolves frozen mid-howl. Arya standing ankle-deep in surf beside a flayed iron anchor, her face half the mask of death, half the grin she wore when sparring with Syria. He jerked awake before dawn, lungs burning. Long claw already half drawn across his chest, as though someone had crept close enough to warrant steel. Only Ghost sat there, quiet, muzzle flecked white, watching him with a patience that felt like judgment. They broke camp in silence. The sky brightened with a wan, milky light that turned every pine to a spear of tarnished silver. Sometime before midday, the ravens found them, 3 black points wheeling overhead, then a 4th pale bird mottled gray and white. Bran's ravens sometimes carried such plumage. Jon whistled the 2-note call he and his brother had used years ago when sending messages by night in the crypts. The pale raven spiraled lower, croaked, and settled on a dead branch above him. A thin ribbon of doeskin bound its leg. Sansa's neat script. Stormbreak at Eastwatch, it read. Ice flows grinding the seaward gates. Lord Commander begs aid. White shadows sighted 15 leagues south of Hardhome. One night only. The letter smelled of rose water and smoke from Winterfell's great hearth. Jon folded the skin, mind racing. From their current path they could cut east by northeast and reach the gift at Queen's Crown in 2 days, Eastwatch in 4. But the column would move slow across trackless drifts. Worse, white shadows near Hardhome meant whites on the march. Maybe worse than whites. He stared at Brienne, saw the same calculation in her eyes. We'll leave the sledges, he decided. Travel light. Food? Podrick asked. Lips cracked. We hunt. He looked to Ghost, who chuffed once and bounded into the snow after the raven, which had taken flight again. Ghost vanished among birch trunks dusted silver. Joan's breath fogged. We ride, he called, voice hoarse but steady. They struck east through a corridor of boulders caked in hoarfrost. By sunset of the first forced march, several of the older Glover men staggered. Boots rhymed, frost creeping up beards. Lana cursed them under her breath and looped rope about their waists, hitching them to her saddle. She hauled them onward, while Brienne distributed flasks of honeyed brandy the Mormonts had tucked beneath their saddle blankets like contraband. The spirits burned throats and lit cheeks flush but kept toes intact. That night no fires. Their scout, a rangy hunter named Baron, returned at dusk with news of a blue glow flickering north across the ridgeline. Snow kicked by hooves, but no whinnies, dead horses. John swallowed. They camped in a stand of fir, layering cloaks 2 deep and sleeping in shifts, weapons drawn. The silence felt too loud, like the pause between heartbeats of a dying man. In the small hours, the bells on the trip lines tinkled once, twice, and then the night exploded in snarls. Ghost's roar tore through darkness, answered by a heavy snap of bone. John rolled to feet, Longclaw naked under cold starlight. Shapes lunged between trees, wolves but wrong, pelts crusted with frost, eyes glassy opal. Undead. They hit the line in a crashing wave. Ghost met them, white streak launching into hollow fur. Teeth tore throat, but there was no blood, only a spray of black ice. 2 more whites flanked, mouths yawning with silent hunger. John sprinted, blade swinging. Longclaw's Valyrian steel sheared a skull. Shards of blue crystal fountained, glittering. Another wolf white barreled Brienne. She fell backward but thrust Oathkeeper upward into its ribcage. It shuddered and split like kindling speared by lightning. Behind them, the column erupted. Mormont arrows hissing, Glover spears bracing. But the undead wolves kept coming, as if poured from the forest's veins. Ghost fought at the center, a whirling anchor, around which the living wolves formed ring. He snapped jaws on a white spine, wrenching until vertebrae popped. The corpse dropped, limp but twitching. John raced for the sledge where dragonglass daggers lay in a chest gifted by Sam before he sailed for Old Town. He flung the lid, grabbed fistfuls, and scattered blades through the snow to every fighter within reach. Glass for bone, he shouted. Podrick took one, stabbed awkwardly. The weapon punched through rotten hide and the white convulsed into shards of brittle frost that vanished on wind. The fight lasted heartbeats and a lifetime. When the last undead wolf crumpled, the forest rang with panting moans, the soft clatter of arrow shafts, broken underfoot. Ghost stood bleeding from a rent across his shoulder, blood steaming. John laid a hand to the wound. The wolf pulled away, impatient, scanning trees for more. Nothing came. Dawn found them counting casualties. 5 men down, 2 missing in the dark, likely taken. John's stomach gnawed at the loss, but worse was the knowledge that somewhere, something commanded the attacking pack and had let them live. A test maybe. He ordered pyres built and bodies burned with dragonglass daggers on tongues. No one questioned the waste of precious blades. They broke camp before the embers cooled. The gift opened ahead, rolling hills sagging under snow, old crofters' cottages half sunken like white barrows. By noon, on the second day, they glimpsed the wall. It loomed pale green, a cliff bound to the sky, hoarfrost whipping off its crest in banners. Even from miles away, they saw the cleft where Eastwatch's seaward gate had broken. The ice parted by the last storm tide, then refrozen into jagged spires. Smoke drifted from the guard tower chimneys, but the signal pyre remained unlit. At dusk, they reached the shadow of the wall. The wind smelled of brine and rot. Eastwatch's rivermouth had frozen, trapping galleys in a vice of ice floes. Black brothers at the pier waved torches. Two icemen, John realized with a jolt they were living, ran to meet the column. Their cheeks shone raw, beards stiff with ice, eyes wide as they recognized John. "Riders came at dawn," the first said, voice cracked. "Hard-home survivors, wildling scouts. They'd seen the dead 3 days walk inland. Hundreds, maybe thousands." "Men?" John dismounted, gaze climbing the wall's colossal height. "Where's Torment?" "Inside the south tower." The brother swallowed. "He's not alone." They found Tormund Giantbane in the mess hall, slumped near the hearth. A broad hand splayed across his ribs where fresh linen wrapped tight. Beside him crouched a girl with red hair like fallen maple leaves. Ygritte's cousin, John recalled from stories, pressing a poultice of moss and melted bear fat. Tormund's glance lifted. "Bit of a scratch," he grunted, though blood had soaked through. Ice Wolf took a taste. "Didn't like my flavor." "Nah me." John clasped his forearm. Tormund's grip felt weaker than John remembered. "We burned what we could," the wildling said, voice low, "but the bastards keep coming. Big one's not far. White as dawn giant, walks like mountain, brings ice winds with him. Never seen the like." John's mouth dried. "A white giant?" "Aye, but smarter than any rotter." Tormund's gaze flitted to Ghost, who lay by the door scanning corners. "Your hound'll feel him first." Before John could answer, the horn sounded once. Flat. Urgent. Men jolted to feet. The horn brayed a second time, then a third. Ghost rose, fur spiking. The third blast meant White Walkers. John dashed outside, boots skidding on frosted plank walks. Every torch along the wall's base guttered in an unnatural gust. Wind that pulsed rather than blew. In the gloom north of the ice, shapes emerged. Silhouettes tall and thin, moving with strange grace. Some rode skeletal elk stripped of flesh, yet bound by ice sinew. At their head lumbered the giant Tormund described. A hulking thing with a broken tree for a club, beard glacier frozen, blue motes swirling in empty eye sockets. The brothers rushed to man scorpions, great iron ballistae aimed downward. Dragonglass bolts were loaded, but the frost-cracked ropes slowed cranks. John bounded up the nearest ladder to the wall walk. Ghost followed, claws scraping. Atop the wall, the knight scoured his face raw. Below, White Walkers fanned out, raising spears carved from cold. The air shivered. Rime crept over the wall's face like a living tide. Arrows launched. Dragonglass shattered against armor of crystalline ice. Some bolts sank, splintering walker limbs into snowy shards. But more walkers replaced the fallen. The giant swung its club. It struck the gate buttress and ice fractured, sagging in cracks. Jon's heart hammered. They couldn't let that breach. Eastwatch would fall and the sea path stand open. He caught Lyanna Mormont scrambling up the opposite stair, a bundle of black powder casks slung across her back. "Old stash in the armory," she shouted above the wind. "Found the fuse coils too." She cut a grin fierce as dawn wolves. Figure giants dislike fire. Brienne hauled 2 kegs herself, Podrick gasping behind with spare fuses. John signaled the brothers to cover them. They rolled barrels to the parapet, directly above the wind-carved notch where the giant hammered. Dragonglass bolts spanged off its shoulders, but each blow of its club gouged deeper. Lyanna jammed fuse into the first barrel. Brienne shielded her with Oathkeeper. John struck flint to steel. Spark, flare, sputter. The fuse hissed. Brienne, Lyanna, and Podrick heaved together, pushing the cask over the lip. It plummeted, fuse trailing fizz, and struck the ice buttress an arm's length from the giant's head. A heartbeat later, the powder boomed. Flame shot sideways, licking the creature's frost-netted beard. The blast carved out a shelf of shattered blue, though the giant only staggered, roaring a sound like avalanches. "Again," John barked. They rolled the second cask. The wind snatched sparks, nearly doused them. Then the fuse caught, burning bright. Lyanna shoved with a grunt. The keg tumbled, struck higher, on the giant's shoulder. Flame and thunder. The creature reeled. Ice ribs caved, brittle armor shedding in plates. It lurched backward. Ghost sprang from ladder midway, leaping impossible height, jaws locking onto the giant's ragged throat. The weight drove it further off balance. It teetered and toppled, smashing into the walker ranks below. Blue motes scattered like fireflies extinguished. The nearest walkers shrieked, shattering, limbs turning to mist. The tide broke. The others pulled back, herding whites to blanket the retreat. Jon saw, in the swirl of blowing snow, a tall figure on a dead stallion raise an icy halberd in salute, mocking or promising return, then wheel and vanish into the dark. Silence left in the retreating army's wake felt deafening, broken only by ghosts panting and the distant grind of splitting sea ice. Brothers cheered, voices hoarse. Lyanna punched Jon's shoulder, pride blazing. Brienne slumped against parapet, relief watering eyes. But Jon's gaze clung to the track of blue coals drifting north. He knew the enemy now gauged their fire, their glass, their resolve. Next assault would come stronger. Still, a fissure of cautious hope cracked his dread. The wall had held, and more living souls manned it tonight than a fortnight ago. Maybe that mattered. In Winterfell's snow, slanted sideways across the yard, while Sansa listened to the maester, read Raven's flight reports, Lannisport plague, Dorne's prince assassinated, and somewhere in Pentos, a sellsword company called the Silver Eyes offering cheap contracts. None pierced her focus like the last line. Eastwatch holds, enemy giant felled, Jon alive. She closed her eyes, relief rolling through her chest like warm wine. Arya burst into the solar without knocking, cheeks flushed from training yard exertion. 2 ironborn longships sighted off Skane, she said. Nymeria's pack cornered their shore party at Black Torch Cove. She tossed a helm rimmed in salt-stiff leather on the table. Its iron snout was gnawed clean through. Wolf fangs still lodged there. That side of the coast is quiet now. Sansa skimmed thumb along Toothmark. And the other. Glover outriders report a 3rd vessel further south. Went to ground near Widow's Watchtower ruins. I'm taking 4 of the quiet knives to scout. Take 10. Arya's smile sharpened. As my lady commands. She slipped out, cloak swirling. That evening Sansa convened her council. Lord Glover and Lady Dustin grumbled about ironborn fleas in northern silk, but none could argue winter-made coast defense precarious. She tasked them with raising watch beacons from salt pans up to Torhind Square, old signal towers left to rot during Bolton occupation. Dustin protested resources. Sansa granted her first pick of freed grain barns as supply depots in exchange. Even compromises smelled of blood and soot these days. When the hall emptied, she lingered by the hearth, reading Jon's last words over and over. We lost 5 of ours. The dead send wolves now. Hold strong, little sister. The ravens carry my vows to walls of ice, but my heart stays where the hearth fire burns. She touched the parchment edge to her lips, then folded it into her sleeve next to the iron key of her father's old solar. Reminder of guardianship unfinished. Ghost's rescued cub, now christened Ember by the kitchen girls for the sparks of red in his eyes, snored under the table, hind paw twitching. She scratched the soft patch behind his jaw, and the tiny direwolf rolled belly up, all teeth and bliss. The softness warmed her for a breath. Outside the wind keened like a woman grieving futures yet to fall. At Eastwatch, repairs stretched through sleepless days. Ropes spliced, scorpion limbs thawed and re-greased. The shattered seaward gate replaced by double buttresses of rough-hewn logs frozen into ice grooves. Tormund emerged from bed by the 4th dawn, stitches puckering but laughter unbroken. He joined Ghost's pre-dawn hunts beyond the moat, limping after the direwolf until breath whistled loud enough to startle ravens. One overcast afternoon as Jon paced the watchwalk, a horn sounded once. Riders on approach. Through the hexed lens of the ranger's spyglass, he saw banners. A white weirwood on field of orange. Small John Umber's party. Behind them, trudged wagons laden with peat and birch staves for the blacksmith forges, plus 24 hounds straining leash, where the smell of whites rode the wind. Jon descended the icy stair to greet them. But before parley commenced, Ghost stiffened. His lips curled. The direwolf's eyes fixed on the horizon behind the umber column, far beyond, as if reading a future etched in falling snowflakes. John felt a pulse in his head. A warning chord. He turned inward, listening through the bond. North. Back. Moving fast. Something heavy, countless footfalls drumming within the snow itself. That night, the air turned brittle. Stars winked out behind an opalescent glaze. Wyland, the steward's drummer, stepped outside for piss and returned frost-blind, white film coating irises. He claimed the wind whispered names of his dead sons. They tended him beside the main hearth. An hour later, the outer bells clanged. No horns. The bells swung themselves, so brothers swore, without hand on rope. John climbed the parapet. A blue line smoldered along the northern horizon, pale flames rippling upside down, as if the earth itself burned aurora. All along the wall, the frost thickened, climbing chains, locking joints. Brothers fussed to chip mechanisms free. Tormund stamped up beside John, beard clattering like frozen bones. And here I thought your brother's raven promised dull nights. The blue glare brightened. In its glow they saw the army. 10,000 shapes. 20. A sea of ice-washed leather and carcass armor, weapons caked in rime. Eyes blazing cerulean. At their center, the pale riders moved. 7, maybe 8. Each spear tip trailing wake of hoarfrost that killed the wind itself. Behind them loomed another giant, and then, impossibly, a mammoth, fur rigid with frost spears, blue flames swirling from nostrils. Joan's throat tightened until air scraped. The wall had held for 8,000 years, but the Night King never marched with forces so vast when ancient heroes faced him. Now John felt the truth in marrow. This was test no longer. This was the breaking ground. He turned to the hornmen. 4 blasts, he ordered. Wake every raven roost. Send word to Castle Black. Light the Queen's fire. The boy stammered. There was no signal for 4. John sights the horn and blew. Once, twice, thrice, and a 4th note raw enough to peel lips. Wind scattered the call across frozen dunes. Ghosts answering howl soared, trembling bricks underfoot. Below, torchbearers raced along ramparts, touching flame to the tar-soaked pyres they'd readied. Smoke streaks spiraled. Sparks spit into the sky. Iswatch's silhouette turned to a crown of ember. As flames flared, the mammoth bellowed. Snow geysered where it stamped. The White Walkers lifted their blades as if saluting fire's feeble defiance. Dragonglass tipped every scorpion bolt. Glover's spearmen manned crank winches until palms split. Doughty, Mormont archers knocked shards fused to ash shafts. The first volley screamed into the night, streaks of black against aurora blue. Some bolts hit, shattering walkers, bursting whites into rime dust. But most sank into the horde and kept traveling, passing through bodies that did not bleed, only cracked, then reknit with frost. John felt cold seep through boot soles, ice climbing. The wall itself seemed to pulse, as though the magic of its making sensed final hours approach. He laid a gloved palm to the stone. It thrummed beneath leather, alive with ancient words. But the thrum sounded weak, a heartbeat fading. He met Tormund's gaze. No jest remained between them, only grim consent. Below, the White Walkers halted. One rider raised a horn carved of human femur. The blast sounded deeper than ocean trenches. When the echo died, the horde advanced, slow, deliberate, weapons lifting in a forest of frozen steel. John drew Longclaw. Hold, he whispered. To himself, to brothers, to ghosts of men who'd stood in this wind 1,000 generations. Then he met Ghost's eyes, red as garnet embers. In the direwolf's gaze, he saw Winterfell's hearthfire, Arya's grin, Sansa's steady hand, Bran's distant dreaming. He squared shoulders. The night swallowed his next breath. He exhaled steam and raised the sword. Valyrian steel glinting firelight. Somewhere far south, Sansa Stark closed her eyes beside Ember's sleeping form and heard a wind against shuttered glass. that sounded almost like a howl. And in that distant echo she whispered a promise. "Hold." The army of the dead came on, and the wall answered with flame, with glass, with steel, and with the breaking thunder of a direwolf's roar rolling above it all, like an anthem carved from the marrow of the north. Okay. Ice hissed like a struck anvil where Eastwatch's outer buttresses met the climbing spell of the Night King's cold. Frozen vapor billowed upward in spirals, each coil rimmed blue from the sorcery that rode inside the advancing host. Jon Snow felt that power shudder through the wall beneath his boots. The ancient wards thrummed low, panicked, as though trying to marshal strength they had not summoned since Bran the Builder first bound fire obsidian into the mortar 8,000 years ago. Each heartbeat came slower than the last, caught in a vice of dread. But he forced breath in, out, and set long claw across the parapet, refusing the tremor in his forearms. Near his feet, Ghost bristled, lips peeled over fangs, red gaze locked on the ocean of dead. Snowflakes halted mid-air around the first White Walker spearhead, where its chill radiance reversed gravity for a heartbeat. Each flake spun crystalline paths, then darted inward and vanished like sparks onto water. In the witch-blue glow, Jon glimpsed the scale of the oncoming army. Waves of whites in shattered armor, taken from Carhold's crypts, cannibal boat people mummified in rigging rope. Skeletal bears whose paws left Ryan claws in their wake, all threaded by long spines of antlered elk whites bearing archers with frost-yoked bows. Scorpion engines barked again. Lady Lyanna Mormont ran one herself, cheeks raw, hair blowing sideways under the recoil, as another dragonglass bolt shrieked downward. It hammered into a column of elk whites, exploded in shrapnel of black and ice. The beasts toppled, riders flinging wide, but more poured round them, unstoppable. At Jon's shoulder a brother of the watch turned to retch over the edge. Frost burned his tears into glimmer on eyelashes. Jon gripped his cloak. "Breathe," he commanded, low, calm, the voice Jorah Mormont once used upon him amid the fist of the first men. "Remember why you stand." The ranger swallowed, steadied, raised dragonglass mid gauntlets and re-nocked his bow. Sometimes courage was nothing but borrowed tone. A sudden hush split the cacophony. The White Walkers had halted 80 yards from the wall's base, forming a silent crescent. Between them, the white giant rose again, torso half gone, but fused anew by sheaths of glimmering frost. One glowing eye burned where two once sat. It hefted its club, now a jagged mass of ice shot through by veins of sapphire magic, then slanted into the ground. A thunderous crack traveled outward. Ice plates split, rearranged, and a stairwell formed, step by step, climbing the wall's face like a serpent of blue crystal. Jon's stomach plunged. Never in any ranger's tales had the dead fashioned tools so swiftly. The Night King meant to take the wall by a ladder of conjured ice. "Fire pots!" Jon shouted. All braziers to the face. Glover men upended tar cauldrons. Black slick cascaded. Mormont archers fired flaming arrows into the stream. Flame whooshed downward, licking the ice steps in tongues of orange. For a heartbeat hope soared. Then the fire dimmed into sputtering sparks, smothered by the unnatural chill emanating from the stair. The flames dulled to embers mid-fall. Torment roared oaths that shook timber planks. He seized a barrel of Empire rum, sloshed it across the parapet, and struck flint. The high-proof liquid erupted, splashing fire across the steps again. But blue frost blossomed through the blaze, extinguishing it as quick. Below, the first whites began climbing, their hands freezing to the crystal ridges, anchoring bodies against gravity. Giant stare. Brienne gasped. Oathkeeper glinted as she waved archers to focus fire on the leading climbers. Arrows hissed. Most found marks. The icy handholds made whites slow targets, but each corpse that fell was replaced instantly. Jon ground his teeth. Dragon glass grenades. Podrick darted to the armory crate, returned with canvas pouches fitted with glass shards soaked in lantern oil. Brothers yanked fuses alight, hurled the packets. Where they burst, violets of frostfire flashed. The shards reacted with the walker's magic, detonating in black glass shrapnel. The nearest rung of the stairs shattered, sending dozens of climbers tumbling. Cheers lifted. cut short as the stair regrew beneath. "The ice is alive," Tormund muttered. A shadow, a shape vast and sinuous, rolled across the clouds above. Jon swung gaze skyward. A dragon? No, impossible. Yet the silhouette banked, its wings serrated like broken glass. Blue light sheeted across its scales. His heart froze. It was Viserion. What remained of Viserion, the dragon the Night King had slain north of the wall. Its body glowed from within, lattice of ice radiating blue flame along wing bones, frost streaming from its maw. "Die!" It shrieked, an unholy keen both living and dead. Somewhere on the ramparts a brother screamed, "Dragon!" Panic rippled. Jon forced iron into his voice. Scorpions. Crews pivoted the ballistae. Cables creaked, gears jammed. Ice fouled the workings. Men beat at winch handles with hammer hilts. The monstrous dragon tilted into a dive. Blue flame erupted from its mouth. A torrent so cold it burned. A beam of crackling power that carved the wall's parapet 30 yards west of Jon. Ice exploded outward in sleet shards. Brothers were hurled, screaming into the dark. Where the bolt passed, the wall's stone and ancient ice turned to powdered snow, vaporized by cold more absolute than any natural winter. Ghosts snarled and leapt clear as the walkway collapsed behind them. Jon shielded his eyes, dragged Lyanna Mormont away from the corroding edge. An entire scorpion crew vanished, their machine tumbling into the abyss. Viserion veered, banking for another pass. Jon lunged for the nearest scorpion, still functional. Brienne already there. Hands bloodied where ice cut through her gloves as she hammered the release lever free. Podrick cranked with frantic strength. The bow arms creaked. The cable inched back. Tormund heaved a dragonglass-tipped bolt into place. The entire engine shuddered under the wind of passing wings. Jon sighted down the spar just as Viserion wheeled. He felt the world narrow. The blue eye in that ruined dragon's skull, the hiss of frost fire collecting behind its teeth. He exhaled and released. The bolt streaked midnight sky, trailing sparks where dragonglass cut frigid air. It struck the dragon's inner wing joint with a dull, resonant crack. A bloom of black-violet energy burst, frost slivered, scales fractured. Viserion lurched, screeching, a sound like glaciers grinding. But the undead beast did not fall. It climbed, banked toward the sea, spiraling out of sight behind the western tower. "We only angered it," Brienne panted. Blood dripped from her wrist. "Again," Jon said. Below, the ice stair reached the parapet. The first wights clambered over. Ghost met them, white blur, teeth flashing. Dragonglass daggers punched after him. Brothers hewing arms from torsos, lopping frost-crusted heads. But the surge kept coming, each corpse a stepping stone for the next. Jon leapt from Scorpion, slashed Longclaw through a white in black brother rags. Blue fire left the corpse as it fell. Ghost and Jon fought side by side, blade and fang, the old dance. But the sheer press pushed defenders back. Across the courtyard beneath the wallwalk, umber spears held the seaward sallyport. Giant ice spiders, 3, their bellies transparent as quartz, scuttled toward them, leaving filaments of hoarfrost webbing. Spearmen stabbed, the points glanced. A spider reared, clamped a man in mandibles of crystalline shard, and tore him in two. Balan Umber bellowed for torches. Men thrust flaming brands through the webs. The spiders hissed, limbs curling as heat split their shells. One burst in a halo of snow, but another kept advancing until Ghost slammed into its flank from above, ripping off a limb. Viserion reemerged over the sea. Its second breath cracked the night. A beam of cold sweeping across the face of the wall southward. Ice shattered. The rampart beneath Jon quaked. Bricks buckled. Jon felt stone shift, heard screams as a section sheared away behind him, plummeting 500 feet into a maelstrom of shattered ice floes below. A wedge of white walkers strode through the gap, their blades exhaling frostlight. Jon zeiced a spare dragonglass spear, hurled it. It speared the first walker through the chest, shattered him into flurries. The others advanced unfazed. Torment met one with an iron axe. Steel rang futile. The walker's blade flicked, severing the axe's head. Torment cursed, grabbed the walker's wrist in bare hands, held it while Podrick drove a dragonglass knife under its jaw. Cracks raced the walker's skull. It burst. 3 remained. Ghost leapt at a third, jaws closing on its arm, but blue flame scorched his fur. He yelped as frost burned skin. Jon plunged Longclaw through that walker's ribs. Valyrian steel bit, releasing shuddering echoes of the forging chants buried in the blade. The walker's essence flickered away like a candle in storm. The last 2 walkers spun, spears targeting Jon's chest from each side. Brienne interposed Oathkeeper, parrying one. The other thrust grazed Jon's ribs, armor plating crumpling in a brittle frost patch. Pain flared cold. He backstepped, heel teetering on the void where Rampart ended. Ghost lunged, knocking one spear aside. Jon caught its shaft, yanked, pulling the walker forward. Brienne scissored Oathkeeper down diagonally. The blade sheared the walker's helm, skull, spine. Its upper half crumbled. The last walker raised its ice sword overhead, only to jerk as a short knife punched through its throat from behind. Lyanna Mormont had vaulted onto its back, blade buried to the hilt. The walker twisted to fling her, but she clung, dragged the knife sideways. The creature split from collar to sternum, disintegrating in crystals. Lyanna dropped to one knee, chest heaving. Jon grabbed her arm. She shook him off with a glare. "No, child," that look said, then sprinted after Podrick to relieve a knot of brothers on the edge. Viserion screamed again, banked inland. Jon tracked its path. The seaward still tower where the Eastwatch beacon flared brightest. The dragon's breath ripped through the beacon. Blue light devoured orange. The tower sloughed. Wind howled into new gaps in the wall, swirling snow inside the courtyard. The words shuddered, a keening sound within stone. Jon felt something tear, deep and old. "Jon!" Bran's whisper, not spoken aloud, but inside Jon's skull. A flicker of weirwood vision. Red leaves, a boy's pale eyes warded by centuries. Jon staggered. "Bran them," Bran's voice breathed. Images flooded. Crates of wildfire vials in Eastwatch's vaults, dusty under seal since King Aerys's day. Dragon glass powder, ravens bound with runes. Jon blinked, gasped. "Wildfire here?" He spun toward the inner tower larder. "Brienne." She met the thought. "The wildfire," she said. Torment's laughter boomed despite carnage. "Blow these ice bastards to sky. I like it." "Menim." Podrick sprinted toward the vault entrance, keys rattling. A spider white lurched in his path. Brienne vaulted, slashed 2 legs off, shoved Podrick onward. Jon, Lyanna, and a half-dozen brothers hauled the first crate out moments later. Ceramic pots, crusted with old wax. "Scatter along the base," Jon barked. Brothers raced down the winch lift, ghost-white courtyard underside lurching under whites and defenders clashing. They smashed pots at the foot of the ice stair where it met the wall. The green fluid seeped, hissing steam as frost sought to smother it. But wildfire burned fire's own opposite. Heat that could not be chilled. Flame eating even water and snow. Jon lit at a torch, jammed its end into the trickle. Wildfire whooshed emerald upwards. The flame ran the stair like a fuse. Whites ignited, screeching soundlessly as green fire consumed their frozen flesh. The ice itself buckled. Instant steam blasting holes. Cracks zigzagged. Graceful a moment before, the stair dissolved into molten glass. Whites tumbled by the hundreds, corpses exploding as they struck forging wildfire below. Blue radiance dimmed where that magic fought. For one beating moment, the living seemed to breathe again. Viserion dived a third time, straight at Jon. Perhaps the Night King had sighted the quarry. The dragon's breast glowed, throat swelling with buildup of frost flame. Jon grabbed the last dragonglass bolt, jammed it onto Brienne's rigged scorpion. She cranked what little tension remained. Ice gears protested, and Jon pulled the release as Viserion opened its jaws. Time slowed, bolt and frostfire crossing. They met mid-air. Valyrian steel-edged glass collided with a river of solid cold. The dragon glass detonated inside the frost breath. A vortex of violet green erupted, swallowing flame and bolt. Shockwave hammered the wall top. Jon fell to a knee. The collision struck Viserion like a fist. Blue light flickered across bones like lightning trapped. The dragon veered, lost altitude, wings beating ragged. It crashed into the frozen sea half a mile offshore, sending up geysers of shattered berg. Ghost howled, triumphant, mournful. But Jon had no breath for victory. The wards sang dissonant agony. Cracks laced the wall from the newly melted base upward. Eastwatch would not stand another beam. The Night King lifted a hand over Miles, and Jon felt the gesture, though he could not see it. Power coalesced, the cold sharpened. "We can't hold," Brienne gasped. "Retreat to the inner keep, blow the tunnel." "No." Jon's voice scraped. "The wards anchor here. If we abandon, the breach spreads." Lyanna Mormont wiped blood from her brow. "Then we hold." She turned, raised her tiny sword dripping white ichor and shrieked, "For the north!" The cry burned hotter than wildfire. Every living throat on the wall answered. Brothers, wildlings, Mormonts, Glovers, former Bolton men reborn under Stark banners. They slammed shields, loosed arrows, hurled their last pots of wildfire. Ghost bounded into the courtyard again. Wolves behind him. Nymeria had led the coastal pack all the way around the sea ice, arriving behind the dead lines. They crashed into white rear ranks, sowing confusion. The Night King stepped into view then. Atop an ice ridge formed from Viserion's breath. Armor rimed in fractal frost. Crown of horns woven from air so cold it glittered. He raised his spear, the same dragon glass lance that had killed Viserion months before. Rand's voice pressed inside Jon's skull. The spear. Jon understood. If he could break that weapon, maybe the magic controlling the dragon corpse would falter entirely. Perhaps the wall's wards could heal, but the Night King stood beyond arrow range on terrain lethal to cross. Torment clapped Jon's shoulder. "Let's go kill a frost demon." Jon stared. "It's suicide. Better than freezing in my beard waiting." Brienne joined them. "We three," she said. "Pod holds the line." Lyanna bristled. "And I am snow in your eyes." "You are Winterfell's heart," Jon replied. "Need you to keep it beating." He gripped her forearm. The girl swallowed fury but nodded. They descended the compromised parapet, crossed onto the fractured face via ropes hammered into cracks. Snow scoured them, claws of ice wind tearing at cloaks. Ghosts bounded ahead, clearing pockets of whites holding edges. The wall's gradient had softened where frostfire had melted long tongues of ice. They skidded, slid, climbed again. Below, the Night King watched, impassive. He swept his spear horizontally. Ice fissures leapt from its tip, racing toward Jon's party across the slanted slope. Brienne hacked one channel with Oathkeeper. Shards exploded outward, but more veins branched, splitting the ice under Tormund's boots. He roared, leapt over a widening gulf, grabbed Jon's forearm. Jon heaved him onto stable perch. They pressed on, maybe 40 yards until the plateau where the Night King waited. Whites flooded downhill. Wolves and wildfire slowed their edges, yet still dozens climbed. Brienne cut through them, Oathkeeper singing. Jon slashed Longclaw in broad arcs. His breath clouded thick, lungs burning icy fire. 10 yards. Tormund hurled a dragonglass axe. It whirled end over end, thudding into the Night King's pauldron. The blade cracked, but only shallow. The Night King tilted head, almost curious, then strode forward, graceful, silent. Ghost lunged first, eyes blazing. The Night King swung spear in lazy motion. The butt clipped Ghost's shoulder, sending the direwolf tumbling. Frost crept into the wound. Ghost snarled, struggled upright, but his foreleg shook. Brienne closed, sword two-handed. Metal kissed ice. Sparks the color of moonlight flew. The spear parried like living crystal, deflecting each blow. Jon flanked left, ducked a thrust, answered with Longclaw. Steel met spear shaft, deafening clang. A shockwave rippled. Frost spiderwebbed across Longclaw's fuller. Tormund barreled low, aiming for knees. The Night King backstepped, pivoted spear downward into Tormund's cap. Ice bloomed black around the wound. Tormund bellowed, hammered fists onto the spear, pinning it into his own flesh. "Now, snow," he roared. Jon saw the opening. Spear anchored in Tormund's leg, the Night King's guard momentarily frozen. Jon lunged. Longclaw's Valyrian edge whistled upward through the spear's midsection. Dragonglass and ice exploded. The weapon shattered into glittering shards. A pulse of deep blue energy burst outward, wind concussing snow in all directions. Jon flew back, slammed onto ice, ears ringing. When his vision cleared, the Night King stood unmoving, empty hands glowing. Where the spear's haft had split, runnels of frostfire coiled around his wrists, seeking shape, but the spell lacked anchor. He raised a hand, as if to conjure again. Nothing formed. Sparks winked and died. His head tilted, expression unreadable. Below, Viserion shrieked, wings thrashing on the frozen inlet. Its chest cracked where the binding magic fractured. Blue fire coughed weak, sputtering. Cracks rippled along skeletal frame. Brienne crawled to Tormund, dragged the spear tip from his calf. Steam rolled. Blood spurted but was red, not frozen black. Ghost limped to Jon's side, pressing muzzle to his chest to check breath. Jon pushed up. The Night King stared, maybe assessing. Then he took one step back. Jon's heart hammered. The Walker King turned slowly toward the north. Jon surged forward, roaring defiance. Sword raised, but the ice under his boots groaned. Fissures zigzagged where the Night King's spell collapsed. The plateau fractured. "Jon." Bran's voice echoed urgent within his skull. The wall, pull back. Before Jon could decide, the Night King leapt effortlessly, clearing a widening chasm, landed amidst his whites. A pulse of silent command rippled. The horde began orderly withdrawal, carrying shattered ranks across sea ice toward the north. The mammoth white bellowed but obeyed, turning lumbering steps. Jon shook in disbelief. Was it victory? Why retreat when Eastwatch lay half-ruined? He sensed answer in the thrum beneath ice. The wards, though torn, had held enough that crossing might still require more power than the Night King could muster tonight without his spear. The defeat wasn't final, but it bought breath. A groan thundered like mountains grinding. Viserion's corpse broke apart. Wing spars collapsed. A wave of frostfire rolled across the inlet, then fizzled. Magic leached away as though uncorking a flask. The dragon's glow extinguished. A collective gasp rose from Eastwatch ramparts. Even the dead's retreating footsteps faltered at that dimming. The mammoth roared again. Sad, lost. Jon sagged to knees. Snow-whipped darkness swirled around them. Tormund groaned but stood, leaning on broken spear like staff. Brienne retrieved Oathkeeper, eyes never leaving the departing host until the aurora band dimmed, blue lights sinking behind the first rise of the haunted forest. Ghost nudged Jon. In those crimson eyes he saw reflection of the battered wall, the gaping mouth of breach, the fires guttering low, but also the still-standing stones, the wolves upon them, the people breathing. Soldiers cheered, ragged, disbelieving. Some sobbed. A Mormont archer dropped to knees, kissed the icy stones. Brothers embraced. Lyanna Mormont appeared, a gash across her temple where Ice Shard had kissed her, but grin wide as dawn. "We live," she said. It sounded curse and blessing, both. Jon could not speak for a time. He looked where the Night King vanished, knowing the respite would be short, but the spear lay shattered. The dragon's corpse was still. The wall's magic hummed. Faint, yes, yet alive. He turned to the fighters crowding behind him. "We will rebuild," he said, voice raw, carrying on the fierce wind. Tonight the wall bent but did not break. Tomorrow we mend the cracks, stone, spell, and blood together. We send ravens south. The war is begun in earnest, and every kingdom must answer. He raised Longclaw high. The blade caught torchlight, reflecting not blue but warm gold. While one heartbeat stands on this wall, the north endures. Cheer thundered, echoing through the shattered archways, into the storm beyond. Winterfell's ravens arrived 4 days later, black birds staggering through snow-choked skies, their messages bound in leather hardened by frost. Sansa read Jon's account at the high table, each word a needle in her chest. Ice stairs, shattered dragon, wounded but living. The Night King turned away. Around her, the hall exhaled relief and dread in equal measure. They had won a night, not the war. Arya returned that same afternoon from Widow's Watch, hair stiff with seawater, Ironborn dead in her wake. She listened in silence, then unslung a satchel. 5 blades taken from raiders murdered by wolf packs, salted blood still clinging. She laid them on the map table. Winter isn't the only enemy, she said, but it is the one that teaches us to sharpen quickly. Dustin and Glover argued supply lines. The smith promised he could forge chain heads filled with wildfire if someone fetched copper shell from White Harbor. Ember growled each time someone spoke of the Night King, as though the pup's tiny heart understood stories older than language. Sansa closed Jon's letter. She smoothed its creases, pressed her signet seal beside his scrawl. Then she turned to the assembled north. "Send riders to every holdfast," she said. "Rouse every hearth. The wall stands, so we have hours, maybe days. We will use them. Then..." She looked beyond torches to the snow-lit yard, where banners of houses once sundered now hung together, stitched by refugee widows. One banner displayed a field of white, a red eye, a direwolf mid-leap. She felt something fierce flare behind her sternum. The old winter song whispered, "The pack survives." At Eastwatch, as new scorpions arrived by sled from Castle Black, Jon and Bran finally met again. The ravens had whispered. Bran traveled by sledge across moon-blinked forests, Hodor's great-grandnephew pulling the runners. He rolled into Eastwatch's courtyard at dusk, wrapped in furs, eyes distant. Jon knelt. They clasped hands. Bran's voice was gentle as snowmelt. "The wall still knows its name, Jon. The words will heal slow. But we must weave living magic into them. We need children of the forest, or their last gifts." He produced a pouch of weirwood seeds, carved with runes. "Plant them in the breach. Water with dragonglass dust and blood freely given. The wall will drink." Jon looked at the white seeds on Bran's pale palm. Felt hope root fragile. He drew a dagger, sliced his own thumb, let crimson drip onto the seeds. Bran smiled faint. Together they walked to the breach, while wolves patrolled and brothers hammered stone. Bran's wheelchair left crisp tracks. They planted the seeds into cracks rimed with hoarfrost. Bran whispered in the tongue of trees. Sounds half sigh, half memory. The blood seeped, the seeds disappeared beneath ice. A faint red pulsed once through the rifts. Above their heads ghost howled, long and low, joined by Nymeria on the coastal rocks, by distant packs echoing across frozen plains. The sound carried south on the wind, touched Winterfell's battlements, trembled Sansa awake from a doze, stirred Ember's ears. It traveled further, over snow-silent castles, through tangled pines across the neck, down river valleys still free of frost, until finally a young smith in King's Landing, looking north at a gray sky no one had seen in living memory, paused hammer upon anvil, and felt the hairs rise on his arms. Somewhere a washerwoman in Old Town raised eyes from her work. Sailors in the stepstones looked east and shivered, though the sun still burned. The north was howling, and the realm heard. Night had not surrendered its final shape. In caverns ice-locked miles north of the wall, the Night King knelt beside shards of his spear, laid reverent hands upon them. Blue flame trickled from fingertips. The shards edged inward, began knitting. Slow, deliberate. Power returned, measured drop by drop. Outside the cave, whites stacked boulders into an altar of frost. On its summit the mammoth corpse lay dormant, awaiting new command. And far inside darkness, a second dragon eye flickered open, burning, questioning. But on the wall, a weirwood sprout unfurled its first leaf in centuries, red as dawn, veins pulsing faint gold. It drank the wind, the blood, the memory. And above it, men and wolves kept watch within the shattered parapet, forging new bolts, singing half-remembered songs by torchlight, every chorus hammered by the rhythm of surviving hearts. So winter's longest night approached, but the wall did not stand alone. It vibrated with lives bound to its fate, from the smallest cub gnawing bone beside Ember in Winterfell's yard, to the scarred direwolf on the rampart, still growling at distant shadows. From the broken giant who refused to fall to the tiny lordling girl who killed ice demons thrice her height. From the king-born bastard forged her height. From the king-born bastard forging fire with blood to the boy who carried all pasts in his home. They were the living memory, the pack, and in their pulse the old magic found voice again. Somewhere in the maelstrom of forthcoming nights, the war would be decided. But tonight, for the first time in 1,000 winters, the wall sang, the low humming note of ice and weirwood, and mortal bravery twined. And that song carried through ghostlight skies, promising that even when the dark marched at the gate with a giant made of coal and a dragon of the grave, hearts that beat together could give stone the strength to breathe. And breathe it did, shuddering once, sealing rifts with a glaze of fresh fallen frost that sparkled crimson where the new leaves touched it, quieting to a stillness that tasted almost like peace. Almost. Okay. Winter's breath coiled silver around torch tips as dawn limped across Eastwatch upon lampless feet, bruising cloud bellies violet and ghosting armor with bruised light. In the pale hush that followed battle's rage, shattered crenellations resembled a line of broken teeth chattering against the horizon. Each stone cusp, choked in rhyme and faint, lingering snake threads of wildfire smoke. Jon Snow walked those ruins as though memorizing pain. Every cracked merlin, every blood-black skid where a brother had fallen, every ember-pocked plank beneath his boots. With him stalked Ghost, leg bandaged, stride stiff but unbowed, scenting the air for whatever echo of death might yet prowl among the drifting cinders. Below, in the shadowed bowl of the courtyard, menders worked with hushed intensity, sewing skin, splinting bone, murmuring prayers beneath clouds of breath. Bent over an upturned barrel, Lyanna Mormont expected stitches for the gash on her brow. She refused milk of the poppy, answering the maester's protests with half a snarl and an eye roll that would have shamed any hound. Not far away, Tormund Giantbane sat on a low stool, thigh bound tight in fresh linen, beard plastered with hoarfrost. He roared approval whenever a brother rose from the healer's sledge, adding names to a grim tally of the living. Jon paused above the breached arch where the wall's inner throat gaped wide. A raw white maw, edges crystallized into teeth of new ice grown overnight. At the opening's floor glimmered a sapling. 3-finger-thin boughs, bark milk pale, leaves the color of dawn blood. The sprout quivered under every wind gust, yet its roots dug deeper, gripping the ancient mortar. Bran's seeds had drunk well. Dragonglass dust, ghosts, direction, Jon's own blood. The mixture had become a modest, fragile miracle. He knelt, pressing gloved palm to the frigid stone, felt the faint pulse beneath. Slow, measured, neither healthy nor dying. The wall had inhaled, but whether it would exhale again remained unknown. Bran's chair rasped behind him, wooden runners shrieking lightly against ice. The three-eyed raven's eyes carried a horizon older than grief. "It holds," Bran said, quiet as flakes whispering. "For now," Jon answered, rising. "Until the Night King forges a new spear, or worse." Bran's gaze wandered where the northern haze met frayed cloud banks. "Viserion's loss buys us moons, maybe. The Night King reshapes power slowly. Ice obeys older songs than fire. But he will come." Jon's jaw set. "Then we greet him with more than stones and borrowed prayers." He considered the battered rampart, the half-repaired scorpions, the ragged line of defenders still limping to and from duty. "We need steel, food, men, and queens," Bran murmured, lips scarcely moving. His eyes glazed silver for a heartbeat, as if catching far-flight raven feathers. Daenerys sails to White Harbor. Her fleet hugs the gleaming sea. Drogon and Rhaegal grow restless, Angry, grief thick. Joan's breath misted. Will she come in time? Time is a river with 3 mouths, Bran replied. She will choose one. He touched the new weirwood leaf. Red veins pulsed as though sharing memory. But we should ready the banks. They descended to the yard where men stood in knots about braziers, forging new esprit as much as weaponry. Brienne pored over parchment maps with Lord Willa Manderley, her mother having camped beyond Eastwatch with the first wedge of marching spears, and Harmond Umber, who had taken command after his father's death on the rampart. When Jon joined, the 3 fell silent, awaiting orders. We cannot drift, he began. If the wall's magic fails again, there will be no time to find courage or copper cauldrons. We root the breach in living fire. Maester Callum knows the recipe Aegon's pyromancers brewed for Dragonstone lighthouse beacons: greenheart sap, peat tar, powdered soulstone. Mix it. Seal it in ceramic shells no frost can crack. Hammer them into the fissures alongside dragonglass shards. Brienne, choose smiths you trust. No. She nodded, soot smudging her cheek. We'll have them before the 3rd moonrise. Lyanna's scouting pick spotted an old quarry half buried west of Oakshore, Harmon said, voice thick with exhaustion. Blue stone flecked with volcanic veins could hold heat better than limestone. Crack it, Jon replied. Ship blocks here. We'll raise a bastion in the breach shaped around Bran's sapling. Willa Manderley spoke next. White Harbor sends 3 grain galleys and a keel of riverstone. But our coffer's thin. I'll sign promissory script, payable from crown revenues, if the Iron Throne still stands come spring. He offered the faintest smile. Willa returned it with an arch lift of brows, understanding the joke's bleakness. Tormund lumbered near, leaning on a spear shaft, turned crutch. You worry about coins while dead things scratch a hole in the sky. Feed people fox meat and pine bark, they'll live. What they need is fire and bellies. Jon gripped the wildling's forearm, both men mindful of the bandage. Hence, the Greenheart and Soul Stone. Behind them, Podrick staggered from the armory bearing a new quarrel shaft, the length of his entire body. Lyanna directed him to a scorpion frame, then shouted at 2 older brothers to lift with backs and not pride. Under her command, men twice her years scrambled like chastened hounds. Jon felt a tug of pride keen as heartstrings. The raven I sent to Sam? He asked Bran. Went wing straight to Old Town. Bran's eyes tracked invisible threads. He researches dawnfire rituals, Valyrian ways of wetting ice to flame. We may need them, Jon muttered. Then louder. I ride at dusk for Winterfell. 2 days on Mormont's fastest gelding if the gods thaw the passes. Ghost rides with me. Eastwatch cannot rely on ravens alone. I must face the lords gathered there. Press the need for men and dragonglass. Brienne frowned. Your wound. The maester cleaned it. Jon flexed ribs, winced, then dismissed the pain. If the Night King returns in a fortnight, I'll have wished I rode sooner. Tormund clapped his back. Go. I'll keep the pups howling. Lyanna pivoted. Take me. Jon's brow knit. Eastwatch still needs command. You have Brienne, Tormund, 2 Umber captains. The North must see its leaders stand together. Queen Daenerys will respect a Mormont voice. Her chin rose, daring refusal. Jon measured the set of her shoulders, then nodded once. Saddle your horse then. Ghost padded to his side with practiced inevitability, nose brushing Jon's gauntlet. The bond hummed. Wolf heat anchoring man's resolve. Jon scratched between ears, felt grateful weight of loyalty. We ride south to speak for every soul breathing on this wall, he whispered. Ghost's tail thudded once, sending frost puffing off the boards. Their descent from the wall felt like slipping spine first through a grave shaft. Cold pressing on lungs, shredding each exhale into white shards. Yet the path Bran's visions had revealed. An old ranger's goat track hugging the cliffs above the coast, held firm under their horses' iron shoes. By the time faint starlight ignited above, they crossed the frozen delta of the new gift, hooves drumming upon river ice thick enough to drown thunder. Harrier gulls wheeled overhead, attracted by carcasses adrift in the shallows. wrecked whites from the dragon's crash still leaching blue stink. Ghost snapped at one gull, chasing it into the gloom. They bivouacked, short of Queen's Crown ruin. An old inn cellar offered dry straw, a miracle. Jon and Lyanna unpacked black bread, shared silent bites while Ghost gnawed a hair caught earlier. Lyanna studied Jon across the guttering candle stub. "You've changed," she said at last, voice near whisper. "War irons people." Her eyes narrowed. "I mean more than scars. When Ghost limps, something flickers through your gaze, pain from his wound." She lifted chin. "My maester says ancient skinchangers shared souls with beasts." Jon stared at the faience wall. Memories of warging cord tensioning under temples, visions felt through ghost jaws, tastes of blood, the ancient earth's breath. He inhaled. The world's boundaries blur when the dark presses. Ghost and I survive in each other. Lyanna nodded as though ticking another tally of respect. She sheathed dagger, stretched cloak over straw jochi. "Long as you steer the beast against the right throats." Sleep came fitful. Jon dreamt of Sansa counting flock inside a crypt of mirrors, of Bran shedding raven feathers, of Daenerys standing on a deck of black water, Drogon's chest glowing crimson. He woke with dawn's bruised gold fracturing the cellar slats. Ghost already paced, ears pricked. Something moved beyond frost-crusted windows. Jon nudged Lyanna awake. They climbed stairs warily. Outside, dawn unveiled an unsettling tableau. A half-circle of fallen corn doll scarecrows planted upright in snow, each stuffed shirt impaled on a spear of pine, each straw skull crowned by an antler rack. Blue wax dripped from the severed horns, candles burnt to stubs. Symbols of the Horned Lord, an old wildling harvest demon. Yet here the arrangement felt like warning. Ghost growled, hackles saw-toothed. Jon scanned tree line. No tracks other than the ones that placed the effigies. Snow already filled whatever prints had been left. Lyanna unsheathed. "This ground carried small folk once," she whispered. "Who wants to frighten it empty?" Jon plucked a candle stub, runes carved along the wax flutes, spirals and arrows culminating in a single jagged glyph he recognized from old Maester scrolls. "The Mark the Night King branded on sacrifices. The Mark the Night King branded on sacrifices." Yet the wax was deep forest blue, tinted with woad. A pigment the free folk used for wedding rites. Union of threats? He shivered. They mounted without breakfast. The horses cantered until midday, hooves clomping over crusted drifts. At dusk, Winterfell's towers breached the horizon. Safe, tall, faintly smoking. Ghost sprinted ahead, yowling welcome. The gate pulley rattled in answer. Torches flared above. Sansa's red cloak was the first color Jon saw atop the parapet, her face stark white against the lowering sky. When they rode through, she descended stone steps fast enough to slip, halting only when Jon swung down and caught her by the elbows. Words failed. Their embrace wrote its own. Arya leaned against a pillar beyond, half grin, half relief too fierce for sound. Ember darted from behind her, yipping. Now pup only by name. His shoulders rose near Arya's hip. He nipped Ghost's ear. Ghost cuffed him. Training returned. In the great hall, Jon reported before an assembly larger than he'd left. Lady Rhea Royce representing Vale Riders. Saladhor Saan lounging near the hearth. Twirling rings, a pirate now chartered by Davos to run obsidian shipments out of Dragonstone's dugout mine. Even Samwell Tarly, spectacles fogged, scrolls sprouting from satchel, arrived 5 days past via galloper ship. Candlelight shimmered on new faces and cautious alliances. Barbary Dustin stood behind Sansa's chair, arms crossed. Glover's cousin Simeon, hair salted, escorted 3 White Harbor maesters. Jon spoke of Eastwatch. The ice stare, the wildfire gambit, the shattered spear. Gasps rippled when he described Viserion's fall. Daenerys' jaw clenched. She had sailed into harbor scarce 2 hours earlier, and now stood cloaked in black and silver, hair damp with sea spray. Drogon and Rhaegal wheeled above Winterfell still, beating up drafts that rattled shutters. She listened with eyes smoldering, only wincing once, when Jon detailed Longclaw severing the spear. "Viserion's remains?" she asked, voice low, iron-rich with sorrow. "Half sunk beneath ice flows," Jon supplied. "Whatever magic animated him seeped away." Sam cleared throat. "Dragon glass runs through dragon's bones in traces. If we salvage them, we craft weapons, spines sharper than any forging." Daenerys folded arms. "I will fish my child from that sea, living or dead." The hall fell silent. She held Jon's gaze, not challenge, but understanding of shared grief. Then Sam spilled parchment. Rituals gleaned from dusty Valyrian grimoires. Dawnfire weaves binding ice glyphs to dragonflame, forging a barrier living and malleable. Smeared sketches depicted twisting runes set into metal lattice arcing overhead like ribs of a sleeping behemoth. He proposed to plant such lattices across the breach, dormant until dragonfire awoke them, creating a curtain of molten glass capable of mutating with any assault. "Needs starlit steel," Sam added, wiping brow. "Meteoric iron from Skagos craters. At least 3,000 weight." Saladhor San smirked. "Skagos? I charge triple for rocks guarded by cannibal goats." Naur. Arms pounded tables in argument, or laughter. Yet Jon caught Daenerys' subtle nod to Tyrion behind her. The imp, cloaked in sable, scribbled figures on wax. "The Queen will fund double the standard rate," he said. "Plus exclusive rights to salvage any gemstones not earmarked for the crown." Saladhor bowed, his price with flourish. Agreement sealed while others still turned over words. Night deepened. Maps unfurled. Stormlands pledged grain. Vale Knights rode through neck passes. Greyjoy longships loyal to Yara offered flank patrol along the lonely light. Each promise felt brittle yet luminous, as though the realm's splinters, when held to candle edge, formed briefly a stained glass mosaic. When council broke, Jon lingered beside the old Godswood gate. Snow sifted onto the heart tree, crimson leaves trembling like wounded hearts. Ghost pressed flank to his knee, head tilted. Steps crunched behind, Daenerys' cloak hooded against flurries. They stood together in silence until the only sound was wind soughing through branches. "Your wounds?" she asked. "I heal," he replied. "You?" Grief lacked stitches. Snow gathered in curls upon Drogon's distant silhouette, roosting along outer battlements. The dragon's eyes glowed coal red, pooling warmth into drifts. Jon watched frost melting beneath the beast. "When this ends," Daenerys whispered, "if Westeros stands, what becomes of the wall?" "It becomes legend again," he said. "Or a garden for Bran's sapling to grow tall." She turned, face half-lit by the Godswood torches. "And you?" Jon stroked ghost fur, feeling the answering thrum of their shared marrow. He thought of Eastwatch's cry, of the men who followed a banner of wolves, of Lyanna's knife punching a walker's throat, of Bran's seeds and Sam's runes, of Sansa Steel calm anchoring Winterfell. He thought of coal too great to name, and the breath of a white dragon undone by valor. The future was a tapestry freshly threaded with both blood and candles, but each knot bound hearts firmer. "I'll stand where the pack needs," he answered. "And when the night is over, perhaps I'll rest." He looked at her then, saw in her eyes a reflection of the same far-off harbor he dreamt toward. A dawn not yet painted. Daenerys smiled. "A small hard thing, but true. Then let's make sure dawn arrives." Eastwatch, 5 days later. Frost-bitten dawn birthed the first black sails of Saladhor's Kagosian convoy. Hulls crusted in salt snow, holds groaning with meteor iron ore wrapped in sheep-hide. Dragons swept overhead scattering gulls. Sailors fell to decks crying prayers, both lewd and reverent. Pyromancers in green robes unpacked crystal vials, eyes aglow at talk of dawnfire arrays. Sam directed apprentices to grind dragon bone spines hauled from the flow where Viserion lay. Half skeleton now, bleaching under winter sun. Each bone sang faintly when filed, as though echoing some last memory of flight. Bran watched through ravens and weirwood dreams, weaving fragile threads of the present, into the old spells living in the wall's core. Gnarled roots from the sapling probed cracks. Ghostly runic buds appeared beneath translucent bark. At Bran's instruction, rangers hammered starlit steel plates into sockets carved between roots, like armor upon a living giant. Tyrion arrived with wagons of scribes and counting tables, pinching copper from Twin Kingdoms treasuries. Willa Manderly drilled water carriers, turning melted snow into hot soup for every hand, pirate or brother, wildling or knight. Tormund supervised a new White Watch. 5 wildling hunters armed with wolfjaw axes patrolling nights south of the ridge, tethered to Ghost's sense of threat. Lyanna trained archers to time volleys with dragon sweeps, arrows sheathed in linen and oil to ignite mid-flight, bright ribbons marking Drogon's path for ground crews. When a brother complained of her size, she slammed his helm with her bow stave, splitting the lip and knocking 2 teeth. No one raised the issue again. And far to the north, within citadels of silence, the Night King contemplated a new weapon. Shards of his spear reforged as stepping stones across a forbidden sea of ancient memory. He studied each fragment, binding them with songs only the cold hears, etching into them wounds of all the winters men had forgotten. He breathed frostfire into the hollow chest of the second dragon corpse, Rhaegal's half-brother, uncovered by White Scouts within a glacial ravine, preserved since the doom of Valyria. The creature twitched, opened eyes the color of cracked diamonds. The dark tide gathered, but on the wall, leaf buds glowed ruby, dragons wheeled under living command, and in every heart that had heard the direwolf's roar, a note of defiance thrummed. Low as stone, bright as ember, dawn waited at the rim of the world. Whether it crossed the threshold would be decided upon these ramparts of ice and will. And for the first time since the long night's last echo faded into myth, the living prepared not merely to endure, but to answer.